tuning in to the 71st episode of College Football with Sam. I appreciate you joining us. Today, we will be discussing ACC and Big 12 Power Ratings, my national championship picture, breakout players for Texas, Ohio State, Michigan, and also giving some coaching report cards for Dan Lanning and Deion Sanders. We're going to go a bit slower today, I think, just to change of pace. I'm feeling in the mood to maybe be a little bit slower, more relaxed with my thoughts than usual. Of course, changing tone when necessary and analysis and speaking fast will be, it'll be used when appropriate. But today is a beautiful, nice Thursday. It's sunny outside here in Michigan, though my blinders are closed to control the lighting in the studio. I'm probably going to go for a walk right after this. And I don't know about you guys, but I feel good. I feel great. Have my glass of water here. I have all of you here. We have the Pate State Chalice of Supremacy that we won after the conclusion of 2025, when entering 2025, I had Indiana winning a playoff game for a time, and brought that up on Josh Pate's show, where he brought it up in one of his bold prediction segments. It's been a nice preseason, and I'm feeling good. So, Big 12 and ACC Power Ratings, that's where we're beginning today. The national title odds, the breakout players, some other topics, including a Michigan State topic. I feel guilty for not talking about Michigan State. I haven't discussed them in a while now, and it's a fan base that's been good to me. I like seeing Michigan State football succeed. I like them. I like their program. I want the Pat Fitzgerald hire to work, but we'll have to see. Maze Blue Michigan asks if I have a 2026 Chalice of Supremacy pick. I don't quite know, if I'm being honest. My Chalice of Supremacy pick, I don't really know. I've been a bit more careful with my predictions so far this year. I think my research is better than it was last year. I'm not overthinking as much. Indiana was something that I was on very early. And yes, I steered away from it last preseason, but was still pretty much higher on them than anyone else. We were high on them for the whole year and picked them to win every regular season game except for the first game against Oregon, in which we still picked them to compete, to scale to Oregon's talent level. It's hard to have a pick like that hits, or that I'm going to believe in every year, because now picking Indiana to win the national title isn't as bold nationally as picking Indiana to reach the college football playoff and win a playoff game or two, which is what I said in the spring that got me the Chalice of Supremacy. If I had to make one this year, and I'm probably not going to back it, we'll see in my predictions, it would be that one of USC, it would be that USC makes a playoff run, or maybe even that USC wins it all. But I do not believe that in the way that I believed in Indiana last year. I think that there is something to what USC is doing. You could also make the case for Michigan. I still don't think people process the coaching upgrade that Michigan has with the talent that they do. It'd be one of those. The Chalice of Supremacy pick would be picking USC or Michigan to win the Big Ten, their fourth national title in a row, I think. Another one that I might buy into that would be hyper bold like that is, trying to think. I mean, would Florida reaching the SEC title game be that bold? I don't quite know. So I'll have to think about one, but that's a good question, Maze Blue. I appreciate it. I appreciate that question in the chat. Be active in the chat. Like the video. the stream, make sure you're subscribed and you've hit that notification bell so that you can watch us when we go live noon on weekdays. We're a bit late today. Wanted to get that Big Ten Power Ratings video out and didn't expect exporting all these graphics to take as long as it did. But we're here. We're here. And ultimately, that's what matters. So post-spring Big 12 Power Ratings, getting a look at the entire Big 12 conference. 16 Big 12 teams. We're going to go from the bottom to the top. And this is a power rating post-spring. So what that means is how I rate these Big 12 teams is by whether or not they would be favored over everyone below them and an underdog to everyone above them. So the top team in this rating, just for clarity, I know for many of you it's probably redundant, the top team would be favored over everyone else. Doesn't mean they'd be guaranteed to beat them, but they'd be favored. The bottom team, 16th in my ratings, would be an underdog to everyone, in my opinion. This is not a prediction of record or of who's going to win the conference. These are just who my best teams are in the month of May for the Big 12. To kick it off, I messed that up, didn't I? Okay. That's okay. Can always edit out. To kick it off, we have Iowa State at 16th, and I think that this is pretty obvious. Iowa State has replaced 80% of its roster from last year. Many of the transfers they brought in are G5 level players. There are some players in the Power 4. They even kept some players around from their roster last year. They have a really good safety on my all Big 12 team. Name is Drew Surges, who they kept. But outside of him and maybe a handful of others, they don't have anyone from Matt Campbell's Iowa State roster. And that's because Matt Campbell was their program. And now their new head coach, Jimmy Rogers, I respect him. I respect his staff. Their staff is probably better than a lot of Big 12 staffs, or some of them. But that roster is in rough shape. I mean, that university got screwed over with Campbell being poached pretty late in the coaching cycle to Penn State. So this is year 0 for the Cyclones. It's not year 1. With UCF and Scott Frost, I don't trust this staff. I love the addition of Alonzo Barnett. But outside of Iowa State, who again has basically a G5 level roster, a roster that might be worse than some G5 rosters, is UCF better than anyone? Are they even going to be better than USF this year, who I nearly confused them for? Former rivalry game between those two schools. I think they have a nice collection of some players, like quarterback. I like what they have at receiver with Dylan Wade and some of the wide receivers they have, and they should be better this year than they were last year. But last year they were pretty dreadful as is, and a lot of the middle-range Big 12 teams, lower-end Big 12 teams, on paper, based on my research for this video, should improve or stay at a similar level, and the teams at the top last year aren't dropping enough to drop below UCF. So they're in a pickle. Colorado is at 14th for me, and a lot of this has to do with roster, because this is the staff that I trust the least. There's only one coach on that staff, Brennan Marion, who I have any ounce of trust in, and he's the offensive coordinator. He's not the head coach, not the DC, not any of the assistants. You just have one out of a assistant and scouting pool that is just enormous, as pretty much all staffs are at the Power 4 level now. In theory, they have some nice players, so they were able to get some players from Texas. They were able to get some players from other Power 4 schools. Santana Hopper is one of the players on defense that I love there. Justin Eaglin is a good corner they got from James Madison. DeAndre Moore Jr., Danny Scudero, Leona Lefo, they have talent. They're more talented than many teams ahead of them from a recruiting standpoint, from a measurables standpoint. But that staff is going to play the worst players. They're not going to develop. They don't have a strong culture there. They'd only be favored over UCF and Iowa State due to talent, and sometimes talent can just carry you absent anything else. but that's not going to win this league. Cincinnati is at 13th. Strong offensive line, strong defensive backfield. The question is, can J.C. French, the fourth at quarterback, pan out? What do they have at receiver? How do they replace Evan Pryor and Tawi Walker at running back? How do they replace an intimidating, middle defensive tackle core that was really strong for them last year? Their defensive coordinator, Tyson Veit, returns to coach under Matt Campbell, this time at Penn State as the linebackers coach. There's a lot that's being replaced there. And while I love the offensive line and defensive backfield, and that gives Cincinnati something to work with, they need more than that. And once again, I don't exactly trust Scott Satterfield. There's a theme with many of these teams outside of Iowa State where I just do not trust their coaches. And that's because a lot of teams in the Big 12 have pretty equivalent recruiting talent across the board. Baylor has some impressive recruiting talent. DJ Lagway will project to be their starting quarterback, and he would probably be the quarterback with the highest high school star rating out of any of the quarterbacks starting in the Big 12. There's one problem, though. He isn't really good, and Billy Napier may have ruined his development. And he didn't go to a school that exactly isn't a good position to possibly develop him. Baylor lost a ton on the offensive line, losing Colton Price to Kentucky. They lose their running backs. Bryson Washington transferred to Auburn. They went all in last year. They should have been so much better, and they just were not. I mean, they were bad. They were better than their record showed, but at some point, with the resources you have, with the talent you've had, you got to win more than 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 games. I mean, that 2021 season looks like a flash in the pan and a fluke more than anything else, unfortunately, with Dave Aranda. I like Jake Spavital, the offensive coordinator, and I do expect Lagway to have a decent season, and there is some talent really everywhere. They're probably a tier above the rest of these teams. So Iowa State is in their own tier of bad. UCF, Colorado, and Cincinnati are in this tier of you're fighting for a bowl game at best. Baylor's probably that next level up where you'd expect them to go to a bowl game, but you're not going to expect them to go many other places. It's the same thing with their rivalry with TCU. Their rival at 11th, the Horned Frogs, I do not like the change at quarterback. I do not. Losing Hoover is going to hurt. They do not look all that talented or together on the offensive line. Jordan DeWare is one of the best receivers, not just in the Big 12, but in college football. And I love the Big 12's wide receiver room. It's very talented across the board. Defensively, what TCU has there might actually triumph what their offense has, shockingly enough. And I say that because they have some impressive players under defensive coordinator Andy Avalos on the defensive line, have some players at safety, even corner, that I like. Ansel Din Mabu, Marcus Deal, they make a great defensive tackle group in the Big 12. But it's weird looking at this offense, which Sonny Dykes, that's been the better side of the football, whether at Louisiana Tech or at Cal, SMU, or TCU, and it looks disheveled, it looks disorganized. It's all going to depend on whether or not their FCS quarterback transfer can pan out there. If he can, maybe they can be a step above this, but if not, they just do not have the talent and the cohesiveness and the depth to be above these other 10 teams. I trust Dykes more than a lot of these coaches for the teams we've discussed. I still think he's a bit overvalued nationally, just a bit overrated. West Virginia's at 10th. Rich Rod's the coach I trust the most out of all these teams we've talked about so far. Rich Rod will be entering year 2 with a program that has backed him with resources, a program that he is very familiar with, that he's won at before. Cam Cook and Amari Latimer and that running back room that they have there, and there's other players beyond those two. Their names escape me, but that is a deep running back room, and pairing that with Michael Hawkins and the spread option that Rich Rod wants to run, with center Landon Livingston, with tackle Karsten Cassidy, with a defense that made some underrated additions in the portal, and has players at linebacker like Malachi Hood, Ben Cutter, true freshman Matt Sig looks to be starting at safety, and he's talented. I love the direction the program's going in. I would love to see them higher in these ratings. There's just so much movement and so much newness that I have a hard time seeing it all work to where West Virginia is a true college football playoff contender, Big 12 title contender. But this is a team that could be contending for, if everything goes their way, maybe they do find their way in the Big 12 championship game, certainly can contend for a nice bowl game or maybe a top 25 finish. Kansas could also do those things. They're at 9th in my Big 12 power ratings. Lance Leipold has fielded back-to-back 5-7 teams. They've lost some close games. They've had some pretty humiliating performances. Longtime quarterback Jalen Daniels is gone, so there's a huge question at the quarterback room. I like what they have at running back with Yassine Willis and Dylan Edwards. Amir Herring panned out for them in the portal last year at guard. Same with Calvin Clements and Nick Morrow. They have a nice tackle group there. And defensively, Blake Harold, Leroy Harris III on the D-line, Trey Lathan at linebacker, a returning starter, Jalen Todd at corner. There's a lot to like there as well. But the question is, can it come together? Can they break through? It really felt as if the past 2 seasons that Kansas was closer to a 6 or 7 win team than a 5-win team, and there was just something blocking them, maybe even mentally, from winning some of those close contests. Or maybe they just ran out of gas. They were well coached but didn't have the talent needed to win those games. I don't quite know what it is, but I still like Leipold as a coach. I probably trust him more than any coach we've discussed so far, outside of maybe West Virginia's Rich Rodriguez. And they have some nice players. And what Kansas does that I like is they bring in players from the Big Ten or the SEC that didn't start, and they come to Kansas, and because the Big 12 just does not have the same talent as those 2 leagues, those players who were backups in the top 2 leagues ball out there, like Emmanuel Henderson last year. Arizona is at 8th. Noah Fifita comes back. He's one of my top quarterbacks in college football. The defense lost 4 defensive backs to the NFL draft. And on my all Big 12 teams, which there are 6 of them, and there's like an extra player at each position, just so I can use my all conference teams as a way to see, the starting players for every roster, if they're a good player, and get some players in from 2 deeps at the better schools. Arizona doesn't have a player at safety on that large list. They only have Javion Cole at cornerback. So the defense is going to have to do some different things at Arizona. You just don't replace 4 draft picks from the DB room. Credit to Danny Gonzalez and the defensive system they ran there. It was one of the more effective defenses in all of college football, according to Game on Paper and in metrics. Love what they have at linebacker with Chase Kennedy and Tay Brown. That's one of the better linebacker rooms in the Big 12. And I also like what they have offensively with the right side of their offensive line. Tristan Bounds, Alexander Deuced, and then the center, Zach Henning. And Kendrick Reese-Cano. If the offensive line, the left side gets sorted out with that rushing attack QB, the offense will be fine. The question for me is the defense. And this coaching staff, well, I think it's, a good, maybe, average at worst. It's not a bad staff. It's not as good as some of these others, like Kansas State, who I have at 7th. Colin Klein is the perfect fit for them, not just because he's an alum, but he helped Texas A&M get to their first ever college football playoff appearance. He was a big part of the reason why Kansas State was successful under Chris Kleiman, who is a legend in his own right due to what he did at the FCS level and what he did at Kansas State when, Texas and Oklahoma were still in the league, and how he was able to field teams with good power ratings that produced some NFL talent, even won the Big 12 when, TCU went on their run in 2022. Avery Johnson comes back, Joe Jackson comes back at halfback, who just, cooked Colorado, cooked Utah. I like what they have on defense. And then Garrett Oakley, Jaron Tibbs, and Josh Manning at wide receiver means this is a skill position and defense team. I wonder what they have on the O-line. I know they have John Pastor, but outside of him, who steps up, who plays at a high level there. But that defense, Wendell Gregory is a first-team All-Big 12 defensive end, in my opinion, and Caleb Patterson was a good addition. Experienced veteran DB from Illinois, had success there. He's going to play at a higher level in the Big 12 than the Big 10 just due to the fact that in terms of talent percentile, he's moving up by moving down to this conference. At 6th, Arizona State and Kenny Dillingham enter the picture for me. I would say starting at Arizona and moving up, these are legitimate Big 12 championship game contenders. And consequently, if things break right for them, they could, in theory, break into the playoff picture. We have yet to get to my, I would say, more so true college football playoff contenders. And then I don't quite know if the Big 12 is a national title contender, but we'll get to that when we talk about some of these teams at the top. Arizona State was just there 2 years ago with Sam Leavitt, with Jordan Tyson, with, not with Raleek Brown. That was last year, and he was phenomenal. Big loss for him going to Texas, but they had Cam Scadaboo. The problem with having a limited NIL budget, but being good at scouting, is you can sometimes turn into a feeder program. And with Leavitt going to LSU and Raleek Brown transferring to Texas, kind of feels like Arizona State might be a program that is starting to be looked at as a feeder program where that staff is really good and they can develop and they can scout, and then a big-time program is going to come in and offer those key players money to get up and get going. And I think that's why Dillingham has been a huge advocate for NIL and trying to get his Arizona State boosters and brass rallied, because in order for them to be competitive, they have to retain some of these guys. They have an underrated quarterback in Cutter Boley, in my mind. Amarion Miller could contend for being wide receiver 1 in the Big 12. CJ Fite is up there with other Big 12 defensive tackles, and I like what they have on defense on paper. But they're not quite at the roster level that the 5 teams ahead of them are at, in my opinion. This is the end of the, dark horse Big 12 title game contender. These are teams that, in my opinion, are a step up roster-wise and in some cases even coaching-wise from who we have already talked about. Although I think Kansas State's assembled quite the staff. Arizona State might have the best staff in the Big 12. Houston's staff with Willie Fritz is one to not trifle with, to not doubt. And the Houston Cougars, they have the second best defense in the Big 12. When I look at Big 12 defenses, I think Texas Tech is clearly 1. I think Houston is clearly 2. Khalil Lawfall, Ashton Porter, Brandon Mack II, Latravion McCutcheon, that's their defense. They're maybe not as deep at D tackle as you'd ideally want to be, but it's Houston. Nothing is going to be ideal there, especially since they're in year 3 and Willie Fritz is building it the way he is. They're not quite at the top resource-wise in the Big 12 or in college football. Ashton Porter was a huge get for them from Oregon. Redshirt Jr. has another year of eligibility beyond this year, so it's not just a 1-year rental piece or a 1-year free agent before he goes off to the NFL. Get him for 2, hopefully. Oregon's D-line was crazy good last year. Not the reason for its struggles, and the backups played a part in that. So getting him to go down to the Big 12, I like him to dominate the league this year. And then Kentrell Webb, Jordan Allen, Will James, Javion White, Jalen Mayo in their DB room. I have all of their starting DNs, all of their starting DBs, maybe even both of their starting linebackers. I think Sione Fotu and Jaden Yates listed as all Big 12 players It's a vicious defense. Then you add in Connor Wegman, you add in Amari Thomas. You're looking at a team that can definitely compete to win the league. The law of close games might suggest that they regress record-wise. They did go 10-3 last year, but power ratings-wise, they're going to be way better. And they return so much that the law of close games might be made irrelevant by the amount that they are upgraded in power ratings this year. Oklahoma State's at 4th. Love what they did in the portal. They're essentially, North Texas with an added year of experience, with some Big 12 players, with some players like Justin Bowick, who transferred in from the Big 10 to get more reps and playing time. James Williams came in from the ACC. So they really are a power team this season. I know they brought in a lot of transfers from the G5. They essentially did what Auburn did with USF. Instead of being in the SEC, though, they're in the Big 12. The schedule's tough. They play Oregon. They play Texas Tech. They play Houston. They play a lot of the top-end Big 12 contenders plus Oregon, who I have power-rated number 1 in America. So the schedule's tough, but we're not talking about schedule. We're talking about who would be favored over who on a neutral field. And I think Oklahoma State would be 4th in that category because they have the number 1 passing quarterback in the league. I think there's an argument maybe for someone like Devin Dampier to be the number 1 quarterback overall, depending on how much you value the designed rush element, the scrambling element. But Mestamaker's the best passer. Caleb Hawkins is the best running back. Wyatt Young can compete for being the best receiver. Chris Barnes, Justin Bowick, I'm very high on. And retaining Jaleel Johnson at the end, bringing in Ethan Weslowski at linebacker, and then LaDainian Fields, returning him from Oklahoma State last year at cornerback, and him and Jaleel Johnson were some of the decent players on a very poor defense. They, as I mentioned earlier, are North Texas, but they're deeper, they're a year older, stronger, wiser, and they have some players with level of talent and upside that North Texas didn't have last year. And where did North Texas finish in power ratings last year? Well, they finished 41st, not extremely high. In efficiency, North Texas finished 28th, though. And efficiency doesn't take in priors, and North Texas before last year was pretty atrocious. So they were a team that was probably top 30 neutral field. I would expect them to be top 25 for sure this year. There's an outside chance they could even be higher than that, and definitely top 20. We got BYU at 3rd. Cornerback Evan Johnson is competing for being the best corner in the league, and that's a league with Bryce Pullock, Will James, John Curry, Javion Cole, a really great, really good defensive back room. And they have the number 1 offensive line in the conference, led by center Bruce Mitchell. Andrew Gentry will be one of the best tackles in the league. Walker Lyons will be one of the best tight ends. LJ Martin at running back could be running back number 1 in the conference. My question for them is wide receiver. They don't have much production returning there. And if they did, I'd power rate them 2 for sure. But wide receiver is a question mark. That staff that BYU has is, I would say, the best we've discussed so far. I understand what Arizona State did in 2024 was very impressive. And then 2025, if they were healthier, maybe things could have been differently. Arizona State and BYU and Houston are the best staffs we've discussed so far. Oklahoma State's, Kansas State's are up there too. And because of that, they were able to hit in the portal, in my opinion, and get better players than many of these other Big 12 teams did. Utah's staff is fairly unproven. I still think good, but not as proven as some of these teams below them. So why are they 2nd in my ratings? Well, Devin Dampier plays a big part in that. Devin Dampier last season was a menace to the conference. He was top 10 in QBR, He nearly had a 5-to-1 TDINT ratio. He had 10 rushing touchdowns and 835 rushing yards. He had 3,300 all-purpose yards and 5'11", 204. He's just low center of gravity, great runner, not the greatest passer in the world. That's why with him and Mestemaker, there's that debate. Mestemaker's the better passer, the better thrower, but you might prefer the overall dynamic abilities that Dampier can give you that maybe Mestemaker can't in terms of diversity of attack with his wheels in the ground game. They return Wayshawn Parker. They lost their entire O-line, but I like their backups. So their O-line is definitely going to drop off, but I still think that they will have a top half O-line in the Big 12 for sure. The key for me is defense. They retained a good amount of their defensive staff. They get Rabbit Evans back from injury. They return Jackson Bene at nickel. Jonathan Hall I have as a first all Big 12 team linebacker. I like what they have at edge. Maybe this will change now that I'm talking about it with you guys, but they were clearly power rated number 2 last year and just lost in a close game on the road to a rival that any power rating would tell you was the inferior team that just won that game. And they return enough and brought in enough where I trust them right now to retain that spot. But they're neck and neck with BYU, Oklahoma State, and Houston. All of those teams have an argument to be 5th or 2nd in my ratings. No one has an argument to be number 1 except for Texas Tech, though. Now, at quarterback, if Hammond is healthy, the only teams that I trust to definitely have a superior quarterback would be Utah, Arizona, and Oklahoma State. I only trust BYU to beat them on the offensive line. I don't think anyone has a better, in terms of depth and starting talent, running back, receiver, or tight end room than they do. And the same goes on defense, with maybe the exception of safety. I can see the argument that Utah and Houston and maybe BYU have a better safety group. I can see the argument for Houston at edge. Outside of that, they're just more talented than everyone. And I think Sheil Wood is a legit top 10 defensive coordinator in America. So they have a great staff. Their scouting is excellent. They have more resources than you. And it's not just like they're firing the money cannon. That defensive effort last year was also great coaching and development. And they made progress this preseason in offense in terms of personnel. And I imagine just another season gelling under Mac Leftwich's system means that unit will take a step forward. Tech, in my opinion, is kind of a soft national title contender. I don't view them as a definitive title contender, but they certainly are a playoff contender. I think Utah, BYU, Oklahoma State, and Houston are also playoff contenders. Arizona State, Kansas State, and Arizona are very, very dark horse teams to get there, but I can see the vision. Tech's the only one in this league who has a realistic shot of winning it all. Those are my post-spring power ratings for the Big 12 Conference. Let me know what you think down below. ACC Power Ratings. This is going to be fun because we are including Notre Dame in this conversation. Notre Dame plus the ACC, I just think it is a simple way to do this exercise. I'm going to power rate the 17 ACC teams plus Notre Dame, sort them by order of who I would favor on a neutral field. So the top team would be favored over the remaining 17. The bottom team would be an underdog to the remaining 17. Hope that helps, and make sure to comment your thoughts down below as the video goes along. We're going to start at the bottom, save the best for last, and at the bottom we have Boston College. Bill O'Brien, I don't exactly know what his status is. I could see him on the hot seat. I could also see a world where Boston College is very patient, or they are perfectly content just fighting for a bowl game every year. Boston College is a very hard place to win. We remember Steve Adazio being there for nearly a decade and at best going 6-6 or 7-5, and at times having worse seasons than that. Jeff Hafley would have been there for close to life if he wanted to. He left to be the Green Bay Packers defensive coordinator. There's just not much on this roster that I like, guys. And while I respect Bill O'Brien as a coach, I also think it's a hard place to win. And last year was a complete disaster. Riddled with injuries, also riddled with a lot of changes, a lot of usage of the portal, and banking on a lot of these portal guys to pan out when there are several players who are transferring out and, look, are good players. We just talked about the Big 12 power ratings. Reed Harris, I have as one of the better Big 12 receivers. Guess where he came from? Boston College. Dylan Lonergan transferred to Rutgers to be their starting quarterback from BC. And it's not exactly like Rutgers is in the fantastic situation this year. So I'm very low on the Boston College Eagles, also very low on the Stanford Cardinals. They hired a new head coach in Tavita Pritchard, who was a quarterback for them, famous for upsetting USC on the road in 2007. Pritchard has worked in the NFL for quite some time as a quarterbacks coach, as a offensive mind. He was with the Commanders last year as, I believe, their quarterbacks coach and passing game. No, just quarterbacks coach. He was the OC at Stanford from 2018 to 2022. Obviously respected enough in the NFL to be there. Now he's Stanford's head coach with Andrew Luck managing the program as the general manager. Very curious to see what they do with, two ex-Stanford quarterbacks, very intelligent minds, have had success in the NFL as a coach or a player. I'm excited. Hopefully Stanford can reemerge. I'm just kind of in a spot where I have to see it to believe it. I will say that Matt Rose is one of the best linebackers in college football, and Jashawn Galvin paired with him make up one of the ACC's better linebacker groups. So they do have some players, more so than Boston College. Boston College, I think, is in the gutter trash of gutter trash tier. That might be the worst Power 4 team this year. Stanford's a step up from that. Wake Forest is a step up from that. And I love Jake Dickert. I've made fun of Scotty Hazelton before on this channel because I am in Michigan. I've watched Michigan State's defense look absolutely horrific under his guidance. I don't really think it was his fault, though, after watching that Wake Forest defense last year. With Aiden Hall, with Langston Hardy, with Dallas Afalava, they got players on that front who are mean, who are hard-hitting. That defense was top 15 in efficiency last year. I'm starting to think that, just like Michigan under Sharon Moore, Michigan State under Mel Tucker was just always going to fail, no matter what coaches they had. And unlike Tucker, Jake Dickert is an excellent CEO. Winning 9 games last year with, I forget who was their quarterback, but he started at Auburn for a while, played at South Carolina, Robbie Ashford. Winning 9 games with Robbie Ashford is coach of the year type stuff because he is a glorified running back that can't throw the football. Like, people talk about, Lamar Jackson's a running back. That's just stupid. It's reductive. I question whether or not your IQ is higher than drywall if you say something like that. But Robbie Ashford was truly atrocious. So to win that many games gives me a desire to grant Jake Dickert and that staff some benefit of the doubt. They also don't have a lot of talent. Most teams at the bottom of the ACC don't have a lot of talent. I think the ACC, because of its bottom and because of its middle, is the worst Power 4 conference. Syracuse doesn't help that either. I was high on Fran Brown after 2024. I understand they had injuries, specifically to Steve Angeli, and the quarterback position with how that offense runs is more important than at other schools. They made a lot of staff changes. Angeli is back for Syracuse after just what is an absolutely brutal injury. And I like Ahmad Miller at running back. Calvin Russell the third at wide receiver. Strangely enough, I didn't expect this when doing research, but Demetrius Samuel Jr. and Chris Peel, that's a nice duo starting at the cornerback position. They're going to have to hope that their transfers on the defensive side of the ball, especially up front, pan out, and that an offensive line and offense overall that just was horrific last year can take that next step. NC State's at 14th. Dave Doran, probably along with Jake Dickert, are the best coaches that we've talked about so far amongst these 5 teams. And they also have the best quarterback there with C.J. Bailey. Outside of C.J. Bailey, though, and Spike Sowles Jr., Teddy Hoffman at wide receiver, Harvey Dyson at edge is a player that I like. There's this lack of players here. And losing Hollywood Smothers to what was thought to be Alabama and then Texas hurts. Justin Jolly, their best receiver at tight end, is gone, ran out of eligibility. And I have doubts about how this team is going to pan out. Dave Doran felt much more like a pre-NIL and portal coach where they could cycle up every few years, then they'd hit the reset button and cycle back up. It's hard to do that now that really anyone can poach your players. They can, if they have enough money, if they're at the top end of the spectrum. People tried to poach C.J. Bailey and he stayed, but they still lost a player like Hollywood Smothers, who's just very impactful for a team like NC State. They are above this lower tier of Syracuse, Wake Forest, and Stanford, who's fighting for a bowl at best. NC State should expect to go to a bowl game, not just compete with one. Same with North Carolina at 13. They will be a better team this year. The question is, will they have a better record? And we're not talking about records in this power rating, but that schedule is tougher. And I don't like what I see at quarterback. I think Billy Edwards could work, but his injury at Wisconsin and some of the other talent in this conference has me questioning how good he will be in the hierarchy. I don't like what I see on O-line or running back. Jordan Shipp, Trechka Kahuna, an underrated receiver group, and I like what I see on the defensive line and at parts of the defense, but they're not deep. It feels like that staff last year was as arrogant as could be, and they thought that they could come in and punk these ACC coaches, and instead they got punked. And Clemson was an awful team last year, and Clemson, beat them like Ohio State beat Michigan State back in 2021, or like Georgia beat TCU. It was just horrific. And as for where North Carolina goes, I don't know. I feel like there is nowhere to go but up, but I'm still not impressed with what I've seen out of this roster. Pittsburgh at 12th. Mason Heinchel had a good year starting as a true freshman. I'm replacing Eli Holstein. They do lose a key running back of theirs from last year. Don't know how they're going to replace him. His name escapes me, and it shouldn't. I know they lose Kenny Johnson to Texas Tech. That does suck. Defensive coordinator Randy Bates retires after a long and successful career with Pitt. I still like their running back room, even though they lost Rasheem Biles. Like, Braylon Lovelace is a good player there. And, Sean Fitzsimmons, great defensive tackle, even though they lost Francis Brewu. They had some players. They lost wide receiver to Texas Tech, D-tackle to Notre Dame, linebacker to Texas, and Michigan was like the second place team for Rasheem Biles. It's crazy how much talent was on that team last year. And I think that Pat Narduzzi, with limited resources, has done a good job. So they are higher than a lot of these other teams because they have some better players, but I also have this inherent trust in their program. Cal's at 11th, under first-year head coach Tosh Lupoy, and Jaron Kiwa Sagapolatele, hope that's how you say his name, Adam Muhammad, and then Ian Strong. They actually have an underrated argument to have the best QB, running back, and wide receiver trio in the ACC, even including Notre Dame and Miami in that mix. I would say that's probably Miami there, who has that argument, but California would probably be that next team if you're looking at who has the best group of three, one quarterback, one running back, and one receiver. Ian Strong was so good last year. That was a huge pickup. Same with Chase Hendricks from Ohio at receiver. They have a good center in Tyson Ruffins. My question is, who's around him at that unit? Defensively, with the defensive mind and recruiting genius, the savant that Lupoy is at recruiting, California looks to be much stronger on offense than defense. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm missing something. We're all imperfect here, and there will be aspects of any power rating preseason that's going to be wrong because it's so hard to be correct in the preseason, especially now. I like California to take a step forward, but there are questions there, as with any of these teams. Duke, for example, they thought they'd return Darian Mensah. And look, if they returned Darian Mensah, see, this is why contracts and collective bargaining are needed and important. If Duke was able to return Darian Mensah, you're talking about a team that has the best quarterback in the league outside of CJ Carr, if you're factoring in Notre Dame, an ACC affiliate. Their roster would still have a ton of questions, don't get me wrong, but they'd at least have players at tackle, center, possibly the best running back in Nate Shepard, with the best quarterback, one of the best tight ends, and enough on defense, because Diaz is a good defensive mind, to where they could be clutch in close games, well-coached, disciplined, have some underrated rising stars, and maybe win the league again. And now they're sitting here in the bottom half of my power ratings, along with like Pittsburgh, Cal, and Duke as teams that should expect to go to a bowl, but can do more than North Carolina and NC State. But their ceiling is capped and their floor is much lower than it was last year because they already lost great players, and they just lost the most important player and perhaps the best player on their team, on top of wide receiver Cooper Barcade, who went to Miami with Darian Mensah. At 9th, we have Florida State. Weird to see them power rated this high because I think Norvell will be fired after this year. If somehow not, he'll eventually be fired. He is not the guy to bring Florida State to where they ought to be. But because of their brand and how they spend, they do have more talent by quite a good bit than anyone we've talked about so far. Quintravion Wisner was a good pickup in the portal. They return Chroma as the backup running back. They return Deuce Robinson, who was an argument to be wide receiver 1 in the league. Would have Malachi Toney there, have some others actually ahead of him too, but he has the argument at least. Daniel Lyons is back at D-tackle. The Desir twins are back. I liked some of their portal pickups, but the vast majority of them, no. They're a good power-rated team, but with that schedule and with their coaching, it's not going to translate to much unless they really hit in all of their close games. So there's not much to talk about with Florida State other than say that it's a sad, lonely place. It's full of despair. This is quite possibly an even lower point in Florida State football than the Willie Taggart era, because you have known for over a year now that this likely isn't going to work, and that this guy and Mike Norvell definitely had a floor that wasn't acceptable for Florida State. And that Alabama game was just one massive striptease that ended in nothing but despair. I genuinely feel bad for Florida State fans. They're power rated higher than a lot of the teams in the league just because of talent, but they will finish behind several of those teams in win-loss record and do not have the same staff that those teams do. Clemson's at 8 for similar reasons. It's just too much talent there. Like, Sammy Brown is a caliber of linebacker that no one else in the ACC talent-wise has except for literally Notre Dame. And maybe SMU, maybe Pitt with Lovelace, maybe Stanford with Matt Rose. Talent-wise, he's better than every single linebacker in the ACC plus Notre Dame except for Kingston Viliamu-Asa. Like, they are so privileged talent-wise, and yet they sucked last year. That's indicative of having one of the worst coaching staffs in college football. Will Helt is a first-team edge. Jaheim Lawson and London Merritt are good players there. Ashton Hampton, I don't even have as a great college corner. He won't even be close to an All-American for me. I bet you he's going to get drafted in the first round next year due to measurables, talent, and, playing good enough in a pretty bad system. Same with TJ Moore and Bryant Wesco Jr. I think they're better college receivers than Hampton as a college corner, but they got the measurables, the talent to be, first round picks and really good. So they just have this talent to them that gives them a potential to pop that most other schools don't. The problem is coaching. They're not really deep. They don't develop anymore. And I have no idea what they're going to do at quarterback, running back, or defensive tackle. Virginia, I have a much better idea there. Bo Perbula was a great get out of the portal. They actually have an offensive line I trust with Drake Metcalf, Noah Jose, Mikhail Boley. What they have at D tackle and the defensive front in particular is special with Zion Wilson, Jason Hammond, Matthew Fobbs-White transferring in from, I believe, Baylor. Fisher Kamek was a pretty good defensive end for them last year, and Cam Robinson and Amato Marcellus. That's their starting linebacker duo, and they're pretty good. Tony Elliott won, I think, a program record 11 games last year and nearly brought Virginia to the college football playoff. So they're deeper on their roster and more proven than anyone below them except for maybe Clemson and FSU. But I trust that staff and QB situation far more at Virginia than Clemson or Florida State. So that's why I have them at 7th. Virginia Tech is at 6th because talent-wise, after what James Franklin brought in the portal, they're pretty much at a Florida State talent level and might even be at a Clemson level. I'd probably still put them a titch lower than Clemson's talent level, but they're close. And I'm like the maybe biggest James Franklin hater out there because I thought that Penn State last year would go 16-0. I thought Franklin was finally going to overcome this because he made some staff hires that I liked and portal additions I liked. No. And he completely blew up that program by, getting fired. There's definitely bitterness there, and I get it, but the way he handled that program, the way he handled the hype, the way that he, made some of the hires that he did, the way he went about building the roster, he genuinely had it all. With the NFL talent that got drafted, if Aller simply didn't get hurt, he would have been a first-round draft pick. And he wrecked it and bungled it. He's not a bad coach, though. I'm one of his bigger haters because of for how long people kept excusing the big game stuff. And that's bad. The average Power 4 coach is better in big games than James Franklin. But James Franklin is much better than the average Power 4 coach at raising a program's floor, getting NFL players, especially on defense, identifying underrated talent, and building a good staff. And there isn't exactly a Ryan Day, Ohio State level coach or program in the ACC, outside of maybe Miami. But Cristobal just hasn't proven that long enough for us to say that. Clemson used to be that, but they're down. So I like what they have there. I love that corner room in particular with Jacquez White, Isaiah Brown Murray, Thomas Williams, Cam Chadwick Jr., Kenny Wosley Jr. That includes nickel. If you include corner with nickel, it's literally them in Notre Dame. I would say for that group, it's absolutely insane what they have starting at that position, and Miami too. But the fact that they are up there at a position with Notre Dame and Miami is wild. And then Kamari Copeland at D tackle is great. I actually think that Ethan Grunkemeyer will have success in the ACC. He looked pretty good against Ohio State and Indiana last year, and he will not face defenses or staffs even close to that, outside of maybe Miami's or Notre Dame's when they play them. They don't play them this year, though. Georgia Tech is at 5th, in large part due to Alberto Mendoza being a quarterback I trust in that system. Justice Haynes is running back number 1 in the league. Malachi Hosley is a great backup. I trust them on offensive line. They have enough on defense to improve there after having a disastrous season last year. And I trust Brent Key way more than I do Franklin. So Now we're entering that next tier where I think that Florida State and Clemson are in this weird position where roster-wise they're better than anyone below them, but there's no way they can even compete for the playoffs with those staffs. Virginia and Virginia Tech are in a position where if enough breaks for them, they could go to Charlotte for sure and potentially be in the playoff picture. Georgia Tech is in this next tier where I think you're looking at a definite ACC championship game contender. Actually, no, hold on. Those are the next teams. Georgia Tech is in the Virginia Tech and Virginia tier. Louisville is in the Charlottesville group, where this is a team who, along with others ranked ahead of them, obviously SMU and Miami, we'll get to them. Those are the three that should expect to be in Charlottesville, in play for the ACC championship. I trust Louisville at the following positions. Running back with Isaac Brown and Keon Brown. That's probably the best running back duo in the ACC outside of Justice Haynes and Malachi Hosley. I trust them at edge with Clev Lubin, AJ Green, and Tyler Thompson. That is the best defensive end group in the ACC, even factoring in Notre Dame, by a mile. It's one of the best in college football. And I would say I'll always trust them at quarterback and receiver with Jeff Brom. The question is defensive backfield in parts. Stanquan Clark returns from injury. Can he be as effective as he was in 2024? And what does that offensive line and defensive tackle group look like? SMU has O-line figured out with Joshua Bates, Addison Nichols, and PJ Williams returning. Those are my top offensive linemen, or competing for the top spot at every position. They might have the best offensive line in the ACC. Ymir Knight returns at receiver. Kevin Jennings I have in the Jaron Kia, Sagapola Tele, and Darian Mensah camp, where those are the top three QBs. Kendrick Raphael is a great running back. And they have lines of scrimmage and linebacker, so defensive front, figured out at a level that isn't quite as good as Notre Dame, but is ahead of everyone else in the ACC in terms of balance. They don't have the D-line that Miami does. Their linebackers are way better, though, so it's a more complete unit. And it's a more complete unit than anyone else in the actual ACC conference. So that plus a staff in SMU's that look, Jeff Brom is 0-2 against Rhett Lashley. So I also trust SMU's staff more than I do Louisville's. I think that if you doubt Miami for whatever reason, if you doubt them, then SMU's the team to pick there. But Miami, I have to put at the top of the ACC conference here. And then Notre Dame's at number one, and I'll just show them because they're, actually not a part of the conference. I just group them in because they're an affiliate. And oftentimes, I at least forget about Notre Dame if I don't group them in with someone else because they're, in that unique situation. Miami is in a tier of their own above the rest of the ACC, very much like Texas Tech is with the Big 12. Miami is the only team in the actual league that can win it all. Obviously, Notre Dame, if we group them in, can also win it all, and I think is the better path, as the schedule is slightly easier, and I think their roster is slightly better. But it's close. It's closer than some others are mentioning. The D-line play, the secondary play, the quarterback play, it's just different. And then Miami, I trust on O-line to at least be, great there. We'll see if it's number one in the ACC or not, but it's going to be in that probably 1 to 3 range in the conference. I trust Notre Dame there too. Miami is the best receivers in the ACC and perhaps in college football. So there's a reason Miami is minus odds to win the ACC. It's going to come down to, I think, one of Miami, SMU, or Louisville that's going to win that league. Those are my college football playoff ACC championship contenders. Miami, along with Notre Dame, is grouped in, the actual national title conversation. Let me know what you think of these power ratings down below. Thank you for watching. And now we get to move on to some other things because those did take a while. I expected them to. Those took a while yesterday. So just a nice Glass of water here. Nice that we have some good concurrent viewers for the ACC and Big 12. Usually we'd be pretty low here, but I'm glad to see that people have stuck around for this. And yeah, Justice Haynes is the best running back in the ACC, if healthy. I mean, I love Mark Fletcher and I love Isaac Brown, but Michigan didn't exactly have a passing attack last year. And again, in the ACC, Michigan's schedule was easy. There isn't a team in the ACC outside of Miami, maybe SMU and Louisville, that will field even like a caliber of athlete on defense that USC or Washington had last year. And Oklahoma and Ohio State, he didn't play Ohio State, but he played Oklahoma. Oklahoma's defense from last year clears any defense he'll face this year, including Miami's, because OU actually had linebackers last year. So Miami's had the higher upside last year than OU's defense did, but OU had the linebackers to better clean things up and stop the run. This year's Miami defense, I would expect probably takes a step back, given a lot of their returning production comes at linebacker with Muhammad Toure. That was their weakness, and I just don't see how they replace Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor. I mean, those were two of maybe the top 5 players in college football. It's like Ohio State's linebackers, for example. Like, you don't reload there traditionally. You might get 80 or 90% of what they were, and that's reloading because of how good they were. Now, I want to talk about the national title odds, because FanDuel and all sports books, a lot of college football content creators, they, release, their top teams, talk about who their favorites are to win it all. I want to discuss my favorites to win the national championship and, order it 1 to 10. We'll just do the top 10 here. Here's how I would set the 2026 national title odds. We're only going to look at the top 10 here. I think it's that simple. I don't think there are more than 10 teams with there are more than 10 teams with a realistic path, but there aren't many more than 10 teams that have a realistic path to win the national championship. How would you set it's the wrong question to ask. How would you set the national championship odds for college football this fall? Let me know down below. I will discuss my top 10 teams in terms of odds to win the national championship. First is Oregon. Second would be Indiana. Third, Notre Dame. And then we got Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, Miami, Texas Tech, USC, and Michigan to round up 4 through 10. I want to explain the tiers behind this, why I have certain teams ranked or rated ahead. Michigan and USC are dark horses. I think it's good to start from the bottom. And they're dark horses because of their potential talent at quarterback, what they have returning on defense in the offensive line in terms of production and starters, the idea that they upgraded their staff, Michigan in a major way. USC just brought in a recruiting class that was so large and productive and talented that they are having true freshmen make noise in spring camp, true freshmen that would start as true freshmen at many schools, like Mark Bowman at tight end, for example. Their schedules are tough, but I trust Riley with this staff and roster and Whittingham with his staff and roster over, say, Kiffin or Venables with their staffs and rosters. It's really, really, really close, though. Extremely close. LSU actually has an easier schedule than Michigan, for sure. Maybe even easier than USC's. OU, I would say, has the toughest schedule out of all of them outside of maybe Michigan's. So there's that group of 4, and really after those 12 teams, I don't think outside of maybe an Alabama putting everything together, you have many outside of those, 2 or 3, if you're looking at Alabama, plus these 10 who can win it all. The Trojans and the Wolverines are surefire dark horses. I would in no way pick them to win it all this year. I might even pick both to miss the college football playoff. but they have the players, the staff, and understand the meta of lines of scrimmage play, of being able to run the football. And they have enough finesse paired with that to where if they get in the playoffs, they could go on a 3-game run for sure. More likely than not, they'd have to go on a 4-game run with their tough schedules and how I have them power rated outside the top 3 in the Big Ten. But they could go on a 4-game run too and win some playoff games. Texas Tech and Miami are in that next tier of college football national championship contenders. Awkward way of phrasing it. I was going to say college football playoff contenders, and I pretty much think they're locks to get there. That's why that was in my mind. Miami's toughest opponent is at Notre Dame, and after that it's at Clemson, hosting Virginia Tech, playing Florida State. What are we doing here? Miami will be favored over every team they play by probably double digits or close to it, outside of Notre Dame on the road, and they could win that game. Texas Tech will be favored over everyone, except for maybe Oklahoma State on the road by double digits, and they will certainly be favored over Oklahoma State. Texas Tech, if they had Sorsby, would probably be 7th or 6th on this list. Sorsby really took a lot of air out of their national championship contending tires. Really, he did. Because I love what they have on defense, lines of scrimmage, receiver, running back. Don't love the QB situation in terms of having to go on a 3-game run against some of these staffs and defenses, though. With Miami, they have a quarterback who can, put the team on his back. I trust them on defense outside of linebacker. I like their offensive line in terms of its potential. We'll see if it plays as well as last year's, better or worse. And I love what they have at the other skill positions, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. Their schedule's harder than Tech's, but they have a better quarterback. They have a better staff. So I think they're still close to a lock. Not quite at a lock to make it. In a similar boat with Texas Tech, the schedule's weak enough where if they just drop 2 games, they could be left out like they nearly were last year. But they're one of the top contenders for sure. And then we have Texas at 6th, Ohio State at 5th. I do, at least. You see the FanDuel odds to the right of these teams and their place in terms of winning it all. Texas and Ohio State I have significantly lower than the FanDuel odds, and that is because of their tough schedules. They have USC and Michigan-like schedules. I would actually argue, even though they are better teams than those two and don't have to play themselves, which usually results in an easier schedule, I would argue they both actually have a tougher schedule than USC and Michigan do. And a part of that's because they play each other. So they have tough schedules and they play each other. So unlike any team on this list outside of USC and Michigan, they actually have fairly decent odds to miss, especially since they play each other and will hand each other at least a loss. Ohio State plays USC, Michigan, Indiana, Oregon, and Iowa in the Big Ten. Those are my top 5 Big Ten teams. They play Texas, who is close to their level in power ratings, on the road. Texas, they don't play Georgia, but they play Oklahoma. They play LSU. They play Missouri. They play Texas A&M, Ole Miss, Florida. They avoid the top team that's given them issues in Georgia, but they play all the other top SEC teams, plus Ohio State, where Ryan Day holds a 2-0 record against Steve Sarkisian and has fielded better teams power ratings-wise over the past 2 years, by quite a bit, actually. So the stuff that's factored into these rankings here by me are how likely are you to make the playoffs, and Ohio State and Texas are lower than the teams ahead of them there, and where are you power rated? I would say Ohio State and Texas, in terms of just raw roster talent, are really only behind Oregon, maybe Notre Dame. But the fact that they're behind someone who has an easier schedule means they're going to be a bit below them. And in terms of coaching staff, Ohio State's, I trust its top three. Don't know if I trust it as much as Indiana's or Georgia's for game day or for, roster purposes, but it's up there. Texas's is definitely a step below those three. So even though Texas hosts Ohio State, and I think has a little bit of an easier schedule, I trust Ohio State's coaching way more. I've seen Ryan Day go on a run after losing 2 games, enduring injuries, and a very tough schedule. I haven't seen Steve Sarkisian do that. So they're kind of in a tier of their own. Like USC, Michigan, OU, LSU, who got left off the list, those are my dark horses. Tech and Miami are teams that are more likely to make the playoffs, in my opinion, than Texas or Ohio State from an odds angle. They just don't have the upside of those two or the roster consistency combined with coaching to quite match what those two could do if they need to go on a postseason run. This top 4, Georgia, Notre Dame, Indiana, Oregon, these are teams that are guaranteed to make the playoffs. I don't see a universe where they miss. I could see one with Indiana, maybe even with Georgia, but I think that's really stretching it, especially with Georgia. With IU's roster, there is the chance that they really get dinged up, that the low blue chip ratio could kick in and they lose a bunch of close games, for example, like 3, and get left out. But I'm not picking that staff to ever do that. Not doing it. Same with the other top staffs in Georgia and Ohio State. And Indiana's an easier schedule than they do. So with Georgia, they're a lock to make it. They got Kirby Smart. They have a returning quarterback, running back, O-line, and defense that, look, the offensive pieces we talked about were great last year. That's good returning production. The defense is wait and see, but are you going to believe that Kirby Smart will field a defense that at times was outside the top 25 for 2 years in a row? I don't, especially with how much they bring back. It's similar with Notre Dame. Notre Dame was, in big games, uber questionable on defense last year. In theory, they made analytical improvements, but we only got to see really a 3-game sample size of Chris Ash in big games. The one game they won was against USC, and they held USC to 24 points, but Nebraska held them to 21. Oregon, who didn't have a good DC, just like maybe good for college football, but not good for P4, held USC to 27. USC only got 26 against Iowa, and that was at home. So how great of a performance was that, really? And then they got shredded by Miami and A&M to begin the year. But I trust that with Freeman and that staff and the abundance of talent on that side of the ball, that they'll improve there. And they return C.J. Carr. They return a good portion of their O-line. On paper, they've upgraded at wide receiver. Talent-wise, they just don't have a lot of production there. And they're more of a lock than anyone to make the playoffs. There's not a world where they miss. Their schedule is the easiest on this list, and their roster is only behind Oregon and Texas's. Maybe there's a world where I could see it's behind Ohio State's or Miami's or Georgia's, but it's a guaranteed top 7 roster with the easiest schedule on this list. So they have the best odds of making it. The reason I have Indiana ahead of them purely relates to coaching. It is a coaching thing. Notre Dame on paper has more talent. In recruiting rankings, they have more talent. They're returning more than Indiana is. They're returning more pieces that were successful that were successful parts of their season last year. Weird phrasing, I know. Than Indiana does. Indiana has the best coaching staff, though, in terms of scouting. We need to see a longer track record before we say that they're number 1 in development. But if you don't care about that sample size, they probably are number 1 there. And they return mean and nasty pieces on defense. Charlie Becker at receiver. I think Hoover was a top 25 quarterback last year, should be top 15 at worst in the system, could be top 10 or even top 5. And the pass blocking O-line was concerning, but it will get better. That run blocking unit is mean. So if they've upgraded at running back and they get even better there, I think they're just going to need Hoover to be 80 or 90% of what Mendoza was to win it all and be as good as they were last year. I'm very high in Indiana this year. Not quite as high as I am on Oregon, though. Oregon would be in a tier of their own because their schedule is more comparable to an Indiana or Georgia. So it's easier than Ohio State's. It's easier than Texas's. It's easier than USC's and Michigan's. It's not as easy as Notre Dame's, Miami's, or Texas Tech's, but their roster is ahead of all of those teams. They're deeper, they're bigger, they're faster, they are stronger, they have better QB play, their wide receiver room is deeper. This is the deepest and best team in college football. It's the best roster. And I know people push back a lot on Lanning, or they ask about the coordinators, and I get that. Lupoy wasn't exactly viewed as a top-end DC, and Hampton worked with Willie Fritz as a defensive coordinator at Tulane. He's been with Oregon for a few years. That's not guaranteed to be a downgrade. Now, moving on from Will Stein to Drew Maringer, that is going to be a downgrade. So there's cause for concern there for sure. And they replace a lot on the O-line, but they've retooled and reloaded at O-line pretty much every single season that Lanning has been there. Not all of those lines have been created equal, but they haven't fielded an O-line that like straight up loses them football games, for example. And we've seen that with other schools, even top contenders recently. So when I look at who is most likely to win the national title, who can win the national title, when I try to factor in schedules and my power ratings and coaching into that, look, teams that benefit from the roster side of it, probably everyone on this list except for possibly Indiana, but I trust their staff so much that it's just kind of a neutral there. Teams that benefit from the staff element, Indiana, Georgia, Ohio State, I would say. Really all of these teams have pretty good staffs, though. These teams are among the best of the best. Schedule was a huge factor here. And the teams that got dinged by schedule, Ohio State and Texas, USC and Michigan, sort of, but you wouldn't see that in a ranking. If I had a graph that showed the distance between each team's odds to win it all, USC and Michigan, you would see how the schedule dings them. Because if they had the same schedule as Texas Tech, I'd probably put them ahead of Tech, even though I think Tech is a better overall roster, because of the quarterback position and the head coach and how those positions are so important. Those are my top 10 teams in odds to win it all, lined up with their odds in FanDuel. I think Oregon is probably the most underrated team in the country right now. I also think it's insane that Georgia is 6th in odds to win it all, and that like Texas and Ohio State are noticeably ahead of them when you look at the schedule difference and the fact that the rosters really aren't that much different, and Georgia has the best coach there. And you are getting very good value on Tech, USC, and Michigan if you believe that Hammond will be healthy for Tech and their roster offensively is taking the next step. There could be value there. There could be value on Miami. I mean, Miami had a lot of flaws last year. There is a world where they are as good as they are last year, and maybe even a little bit like better at quarterback in particular. And there's value on USC and Michigan. Like if you think that I'm too high in Indiana or Oregon or Ohio State and not high enough on USC and Michigan, well, plus 3,500 is right there. And if they make the national tournament, the college football playoff, then you can cash out with a profit if they just make the playoffs, because they're not favored to make the playoffs right now. Those are my national title contenders. Let me know what you think, please. That list is definitely going to change, I think, at least a little bit. Maybe not completely, but there will be some adjustments to it when we get closer to the fall, because I've done all the research for rosters in terms of like starting in too deep. I want to maybe look a little bit deeper as the summer goes on in those rosters, but not too deep, because to a certain point when you're looking at, third or fourth stringers, you're wasting your time. They're not really going to play. And I want to take a deeper look at staffs too. Now we're at a point where we are looking at breakout players for Ohio State, for Michigan, for Texas, and then we'll look at some other areas too. But before that, just changing something with my schedule here, these shows are longer. We're close to 2 hours. I've found that I really can't go 2 hours without water, or at least, a big glass of water and stretching. So I am going to take a brief break here, and we will be back in 5 minutes to discuss these breakout players and some other topics. We'll see you very soon. Stay tuned. And be patient. We're not leaving you. It's just 5 minutes, taking a break. And welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being patient. I appreciate the wait. What's going on here? Alrighty. People are already disagreeing with my Big Ten Power Ratings. It's a lovely sight to see. Wow. There are people that are saying, like, you gotta have, bless me there. It seems like a lot of the complaints are directed at how high I am on Oregon. Look, it's okay. Maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe. But look, I mean, they're the old team this year. They, I don't know. They just do well. Okay. Time to talk about Ohio State's offense and the breakout players there. So we'll discuss that because, look, Arthur Smith is in town, and I was just replying to a comment while I was, actually drinking some water and going to the bathroom on my break about someone, criticizing me, saying that Oregon was in their own tier roster-wise in the Big Ten when Ohio State exists. And look, Ohio State's one of those rosters that just can be number one in any given year because I love their staff, I love their recruiting, the players have all the appropriate measurables and the potential in the world. And he replied to another person who disagreed with him in that reply, saying, like, well, now we have Arthur Smith. We don't have, like, a wide receivers coach calling the offense for the first time. And that's a, legitimate thing to look at. I think that Heartline to their program and identity may have been more valuable than Smith, but in a given season and in a given game, they probably upgraded on that side of the ball staff-wise because they have a better play caller. Heartline was much more of an important off-the-field piece than an on-the-field piece. Smith is more of like an on-the-field piece, if that makes sense. And you see that with how Smith originally, when he was hired, was not made to be one of the staffers that would go on the road and recruit. Like, he was just an on-field play-calling guy. Heartline had on-field involvement because he was an important cultural piece, was on the sidelines, was at times, the OC, but his role was more like development and recruiting off the field, not scheming on game day. So you still get like a lot of that. Michigander 1-2-1-2, is that true that he's calling the passing plays? Because I thought that, in fact, I know that Chris Drew told me that Day said he was going to be hands off on the offense, which I don't believe. Day is he's both too controlling and too smart to not be involved in the offense because he's an offensive genius. Yeah, it's just interesting. Suggesting what's that comment meant to be? Suggesting you like Michigan more than Texas is a joke. In what regard? It's not Texas. It's more than Texas Tech in regards to with the QB situation, which was totally unexpected. I hope I didn't say Texas in that segment because that would be an insane opinion. No, for odds to win, if both Texas Tech and Michigan get there, if Michigan gets to the playoff, it's because of their quarterback. If Tech gets there, they could get there while not even being great because the schedule and the defense they have. That's what I meant. Hopefully that's what you were referencing, Logan. If not, yeah. Anyway, Ohio State's offense. Who takes a big leap in this veteran Buckeye offense? There are so many vets and great players coming back that I had to really peel through and think about who on this team can be a key contributor when you have so many key contributors coming back, like Luke Montgomery, Carson Hinsman, Austin Sierreveld, Julian Sayin, Bo Jackson, Jeremiah Smith, and many of those players can take steps forward, but Montgomery's already one of my favorite guards, so he can't really break out. Hinsman started forever. Sierreveld was a pretty high floor player, got depanced against Miami, but so did Carter Smith. So who are players that didn't do much last year, or who I think have a massive amount of room to grow, and they're going to showcase it this year? Well, I would probably start at running back with Isaiah West. He played some last year. He's out this spring. But Isaiah West is a really underrated player, and he has the best coach on the offensive side of the ball developing him in Carlos Loughlin. We all saw what he did last year with Bo Jackson, and I would have Bo Jackson right now as running back number 1 in the Big Ten. Isaiah West is a backup. He's clearly running back 2, if healthy. But I think he's a pretty underrated player, and I would expect him to cross 500 yards this year, probably double his touchdown count, if not do more than that, especially if Arthur Smith's play calling combined with the offensive line hopefully improving. If all of that meshes together well, then you could be looking at Isaiah West really tripling his rushing yards or tripling his touchdowns, and Bo Jackson having another 1,000-yard plus caliber season. He's a great player. Just there was a lot of confusion in figuring things out with Ohio State's rushing attack last year, and that shouldn't be the case this year. Chris Henry Jr., we're all expecting to break out in a big way, so maybe it is redundant, but I think that it's important to highlight things even if they're obvious, because they're still true. Ohio State's wide receiver room is kind of like a cliche, because it's always good, it's always there. Sometimes people get bored with it, but that doesn't make it any less true that it's one of the best in college football. Certainly if you're looking at it from a who's the best wide receiver 1 in college football, it's Ohio State, because they got Jeremiah Smith. Will Chris Henry be as good as a freshman as Jeremiah Smith was as a freshman? I wouldn't say so, no, because Jeremiah Smith's a historic player. But can he be, say, as good as Marvin Harrison Jr. was as a true freshman, and he was pretty good in that Rose Bowl? Can he be Emeka Egbuka level good, and he just gets more touches because the receiver room doesn't have the 3-headed monster that it did in 2021? I would say, yeah, that's probably more realistic and still puts him as one of the better wide receivers in all of college football. He has KJ Duff level catch radius at 6'5" with his length. So you're getting a receiver whose talents in many ways people will compare to Smith naturally. But if you look at it in a deeper way, he is kind of a, different wide receiver. And I would expect them to move Smith around and integrate their best players as the season goes on. And their third best receiver, or maybe their second best, is Brock Boyd out of Texas. Really underrated. That was a great scouting job by Ohio State and ex-wide receivers coach Brian Hartline, and good on Cortez Hankton and the staff for keeping him as a part of the 2026 recruiting class. He was the first member of that freshman class to lose his black stripe. I think that means something. Should have been a 4-star out of high school for sure, and a high-level one. Have no idea how he was a 3-star. You have Kyle Parker in that room. You have Devin McCune in that receiver room. I do not think they have the same ceilings as Boyd or Henry, and they've already played. So I'm not expecting them to break out in the same way that I am Boyd or Henry. I would expect the starting receivers by the end of the year to be Boyd, Henry, and Smith. Those will be your starting 3 wide receivers. To continue with the receiver room, but move to a different receiver position, you're looking at Mason Williams, the tight end. He lost his black stripe. I know that, there's talk of Nate Roberts being the best tight end on the team. Played as a true freshman last year. Look, Ohio State's best blocking tight end was Will Kazmarek, transferred in from Ohio. Mason Williams is a good blocker. He's an effective receiver. He's officially a part of the team. Sometimes you can play without your black stripe being removed, but it's usually, in very minimal reps. Williams is talented. He's a hard worker, proven out of the MAC, and I think is going to fit in with this offense, which is going to run 12 and 13 personnel, and certainly 11 personnel. Ohio State was trying to do that last year. It didn't really work. I don't think Day is going to move away from that, though. I think Arthur Smith wants to do that, wants to get involved with that. I don't know if Ohio State's tight end group is better than it was last year, because, Kazmarek was a day 3 pick. Actually may have been day 2. I forget if he was picked in round 3 or round 4. Claire was a day 2 pick. That's historic tight end draft production for Ohio State. They're good on Keenan Bailey and the staff for making that possible. But Williams is good. He's going to help that room at least reload to a bit, or to a degree. And then you have the Northwestern transfer. You have Nate Roberts coming back, Bennett Christian. So we'll see how this tight end room is made up of. But I think that Mason Williams will be tight end 1 this year. And then on the offensive line, they return a whole lot there. Montgomery's the best player. I can't really pick him to break out, or anyone else who's a starter there. Hinsman and Montgomery are the best players. Ian Moore is their best tackle in terms of potential, I think, and he hasn't started yet. So that's why I have him on the breakout list there. He's an excellent pass blocker. I would probably tab him as the best pass blocker on the team. Philip Daniels and Austin Searveld are more guards than tackles, I would say. Daniels, for context, is better at run blocking than pass blocking. You saw that at Minnesota. I think you saw that a bit last year. And they just don't have some of the natural, length or techniques or whatever is needed to play on the offensive line to be a, future NFL tackle the way that I think Ian Moore has that. He just has some things that you can't teach, I think. The hands, the fact that he was playing well while being young as a backup. I like him. And I think that Ohio State will start him. I'm not going to say should, because I don't know more than that staff. But will they? I think so, for sure. With the loss of Shabola, that opens up a guard spot that I think one of Daniels or Searveld is better suited to take than anyone else besides them, and that should open up an opportunity for Ian Moore, especially as Moore was healthy, I believe, during the spring. Searveld and some others on the offensive line were not. They were nursing some injuries that they sustained at the end of the season, and the staff was just making sure that they could get healthy. And how these players will impact this offense is Ohio State's yards per rush. I don't know how much it'll go up because the schedule's way tougher. Last year it was a schedule that was outside the top 40 for much of the year. In the big games, the rushing attack was nowhere to be found. The schedule this year is definitely going to be top 5, maybe even number 1. So it'll almost be exponentially harder. But I think the rushing attack on film will be better. And analytically it will be better too, because it'll be around probably 4.5 to 5 yards per carry, with a much tougher schedule. Much similar to, say, the 2024 rushing attack, which at the end of the year was hovering around 5 yards per carry with a top 2 strength of schedule, and it was pretty effective in certain games, and other games, was not, but when it mattered, they were great, and Judkins and Henderson were fantastic. This also helps the passing attack, too, because when you can run the football, that forces a defensive front to be honest. And that can help make the quarterback's life easier, and you're not having, like what Miami did last year, where they're spreading out in wide technique, and they're just teeing off and coming right at you. And their job is just quarterback, and we'll have the linebackers and safeties clean up the run if need be, or we're so good that we can tee off and still stop the run. And you saw that in the Indiana and Miami games. And this season, they can't have that happen with the schedule. They need to have someone in pass protection and the offensive line in general take a step forward. They need to do well at tight end. They need receiver to have someone who's uber talented emerge, like Henry, and I think he will, or Boyd, because Carnell Tate was, a top 5 pick. That shows you how the NFL views him. One thing that I really expect Ohio State to take a step forward in is pass blocking in general, but mostly from the running backs. That was a huge thing that Judkins and Henderson were elite at in 2024 that was missed from the Buckeyes last season. And I think that that will be a point of emphasis from their staff with both Isaiah West and Bo Jackson or whoever is in that room, that they will do a better job pass blocking from the running back position. And with Ian Moore at tackle, who I project to start, I think just in general, their pass blocking, especially in these bigger games, is going to be more effective. It was an offense last year that I think in a variety of ways was one-dimensional, and I think paper tiger is a bit too extreme to decide it or to describe it, but it was overrated. It was an overrated offense. They only scored 12.8 points per game in big games. That was Ohio State's best defense that I've ever seen. I haven't watched college football for too long, haven't even watched it consistently yet for a decade, though we're getting close. But that game against Indiana, where they only allowed like 13 points, and even if IU makes their field goals, only 16, that was the best I've seen Ohio State's defense play on a given day in the 2020s. So with Patricia on that side of the ball, with the coaches they have, I don't trust that unit to improve because, like Georgia in 2021, you're not improving from that. Michigan's 2023 defense was never going to get better than that with what they return next year. It's similar with Ohio State, but I do trust that defense to be top 5, certainly top 10 with the talent they have. The offense, it's up to them to take the step forward because if they do, this team can win at a level that last year's team did not. And I think that with another year of Julian Sayin learning the playbook, another year of, him gaining chemistry with his team, another year of the O-line being together and losing their best player to the portal, which is a blessing, the running backs being older, having a much better play caller in Arthur Smith, and just having more experience and a lot of those younger players having a full season under their belt of experience with the talent they have, the development and recruiting that takes place at Ohio State. I do expect this offense to improve, and in some areas by quite a bit. So that's why I think that Isaiah West, Ian Moore, Mason Williams, Chris Henry Jr., Brock Boyd, they either break out and emerge or they take a big leap from where they were last year. And it's going to play into Ohio State yet again, being a national title contender, reaching the college football playoff, being a great team and a great program. And that will continue. As for Michigan, talking about their defense, so going over to Ohio State's rival, but talking about the defensive side of the football. For the first time since 2020, Michigan did not field a top 10 quality defense last year. They did from 2021 to 2024, and with new defensive coordinator Jay Hill coming over from BYU, following Kyle Whittingham from Utah, how does Michigan's defense look this year? They're going to need new players to step up to help this defense play at not just a top 10 level, but a top 15 level, because they were quietly pretty bad last year. So let's take a look at which players could help Michigan field a top 10 defense and get back to defensive excellence. John Henry Daly at defensive end had a 92 PFF grade and 11.5 sacks and 51 pressures last year. Easily Michigan's best player on defense, if healthy. He was a huge get. Michigan last year lacked pass rush. I know Derek Moore put up big numbers, but he wasn't a first-round pick, and you saw him against USC, against Ohio State, against Oklahoma, get neutered. He was put in bad positions, yes, but he also does not have the motor that John Henry Daly does. I would expect Michigan's pass rush just solely by his addition, not even talking about the improvements of the other players due to a superior coaching staff, just by him alone, Michigan's pass rush will improve. Nate Marshall is a player who played as a true freshman last year, 6'3", 240 pounds, top 50 player out of high school. With this new staff, I would expect him to take a step forward, and with older players like Cameron Brandt or Dominic Nichols just not having the upside he does, with better development, I would expect his repetitions and his snaps to increase game over game over game. He had the same amount of pressures as total tackles last year, and he just didn't play that much. There is a special talent there with Nate Marshall, the man out of Oak Park, Illinois, now a true sophomore for the Wolverines. Eno Etta went into the portal. Michigan was lucky to get him back because at 6'5", 320 pounds, there's a lot of talent to unlock there. He had 13 pressures, 2.5 tackles for loss last season, a part of a defensive front for Michigan that on paper I thought they had the talent. They had one of the better coaches on the staff, but that staff was so bad and the players were a bit overrated, and that combined made a very overrated defensive line that just, you saw they had some talent there, but they weren't as effective as they should have been. Can Etta take a step forward in his game and along with returning starter Trey Pierce make up a improved Michigan defensive tackle group? We'll see. I'm optimistic due to how bad the staff was, but he's not as proven as, say, John Henry Daly, isn't as young as Nate Marshall, where it's going to be as easy to get out some of the, bad coaching that he went through the past 2 seasons. But I'm optimistic about this defensive line, especially with what the staff has repeatedly said about it. Jay Hill and Kyle Whittingham have praised it as the strength of the defense. One player that I haven't heard much about who needs to take a step forward due to the weakness of his room is Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng. The linebacker group for Michigan's been pretty quiet. On paper, it is the, I would say, worst position on the entire team. I'm very skeptical of it. If he can have a big year with what Michigan expects to have on D-line and at DB, this will be a top 10 defense. He only had 1 solo tackle, 4 overall, played as a true freshman last year. Jimmy Rolder, Cole Sullivan, Jayshawn Barham, those are the top 3 linebackers, and, early in the year, Barham moved full-time to edge, but could still play occasionally at linebacker. They're all gone. So a lot of Michigan's top production is absent from that room. They're going to have to rely on Staling, a transfer from North Dakota State, and younger players to make up that production there. You'll certainly see a talent drop-off. They might be more fundamentally sound due to superior coaching, and they might be put in better positions. But with Michigan at linebacker, it's all going to depend on how far the drop-off is from last year's unit, not whether or not it's going to be a night and day difference like the D-line or secondary could be. So pay attention to him. I do expect him to have a breakout season and be better just by virtue of starting and having a better staff. Chris Bracey at safety, transferring in from Memphis. I think it was an underrated get with 81 total tackles, 9 pass breakups and interception. Rod Moore is returning for Michigan after spending all of 2024 out with an injury. Tried to come back last year and just couldn't. He'll be starting again. Curious to see how that goes. I thought that he would be pretty good in 24. Then he got hurt, took him off my list. Thought that he would be great last year. Didn't play all that much. Looked good when he did, but was just never really fully healthy. I'm interested to see how he looks this season. Bracey will play an integral role in a position for Michigan that is one of the weaker ones on defense. I think corner, D-tackle, D-end are strong positions. Safety's a bit questionable. Linebackers just, I think, obviously a weaker position on this team and potentially in the Big Ten, which is such a loaded conference that to have that lack of Power 4 starting experience is definitely a red flag, at the very best a yellow flag. I do expect Bracey to play well, and I expect Rod Moore to come back and play at a high level. With him not playing a full season for 2 years in a row and being absent of one, I'm not going to rank him as, say, a first-team All-Big Ten safety, even though that is his ceiling. And he is an old player. So if he is fully healthy, somehow, some way, and back to who he will be one of the better college safeties in the Big Ten by virtue of how he's played before, the staff that he's a part of, the talent he has, and the experience that he has. It's really going to come down to how healthy he is, because if he is completely healthy and he's playing every Saturday and that knee is as good as it can be, then he's one of the best safeties in college football. But that's asking a lot after all the injuries that he's been through. So I expect him to be better than he was last year, to be back, to be starting. Michigan needs him to, step back in and not just be a leader, which he already is, but to be someone who can play at a high level in the Big Ten and can hit hard, can read offenses, and he can do all those things, but he needs to stay healthy. That's what they need out of him. Smith Snowden at quarterback or cornerback, I don't think there's much to say other than he's going to come in and he's going to do well. And there isn't much to say because when you look at 37 total tackles, 9 pass breakups, 2 picks, was a staple player on Morgan Scaley and Kyle Whittingham's defense at Utah last year. He's a huge get. And you pair him along with Yair Hill, and you have a great corner room. It's a corner room that is going to compete for one of the best in America. Hill was a player that was inconsistent in 2024, improved last year, and I would expect with this staff is going to be a fantastic corner. 5 pass breakups, a pick, a forced fumble, 36 total tackles, 77.6 PFF grade, 6'2", 190 pounds, all the talent in the world to be a future NFL corner. And now he has the staff to actually teach him how to be one instead of, playing with things that ought not to be spoken about on YouTube because we have children around here. I love Hill, Snowden, that corner room. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with Zeke Berry. He's consistently struggled year over year over year. If the staff can get him right along with Hill and Snowden, you might have the best corner room in college football. This is one of the Michigan positions on the team that is as talented as you will find anywhere in the country. And this defense, look, this was a paper tiger unit. I will be honest about that. They were good on paper in yards allowed per pass and yards allowed per carry. Why? Because they played no one. Ohio State's O-line last year, the program who you've dominated on the lines of scrimmage for 4 years before the loss last year, their O-line wasn't even great. It was at best good, maybe above average in the P4. It got murdered in big games. They couldn't run against Texas, Indiana, Miami. They looked helpless in the run game against those teams, and they looked helpless in trying to decipher Indiana's stunts. They looked helpless physically against Miami in the pass rush and physically against Indiana in the run game. And they were able to run down your throat and demoralize you, and you could not get past them in pass blocking. That is how bad that Michigan team was last year, specifically on defense, and how poor the adjustments were. That makes it even more humiliating for Michigan. They couldn't get pressure consistently. About a fourth of their sacks came against a bad Nebraska O-line. They struggled with takeaways. They struggled with, getting TFLs. They struggled with defending the pass against USC, Ohio State, even Oklahoma. They had talent, but their coaching wasn't good, and they didn't have the talent they did in 2024 to mask some of the issues with coaching. Now Michigan has one of the best defensive minds in Jay Hill, wonderful assistant coaches. They're more talented than last year's team with the portal additions they made on, I would say, DB and D end. They're at least as talented because Derek Moore was very talented. What's going to determine how far this team can go, because the defense will be better than it was last year, is does the talent drop off at linebacker and D tackle cancel out the gains at other positions and the gains at the coaching position? Michigan's defense, when you look at the advanced metrics and when you watch them, was, to be frank, actually the worst side of the football at times. I mean, think about the Washington game, where if you just fix discipline issues, Michigan probably scores 40 points in that game. And you look at the defense in that game, and Washington had no business even scoring a touchdown against that team. They were on the road, they were tired, they were banged up. Williams played a bad game. They weren't calling the game well. And they were able to find deep passing plays or run just well enough, even with the horrific O-line, to score some points and make it a competitive game. You look at the game against Purdue, and the offense, was, bleh. But special teams didn't help that either in terms of scoring points, and neither did the receiver room. Michigan's defense was the more talented unit by quite a bit compared to the offense. And yet, you found it against USC, or you found it against Michigan State, or against Nebraska, letting those teams in the game when it should have been put away. I'm excited to see how this defense plays. I'm optimistic to see its improvements, and overall, Michigan will be a significantly better team this year compared to last year. That may not translate to the record sheet because the schedule is much tougher, but Michigan will be more competitive, they will be better coached, and you won't see the same issues or blown assignments or lack of discipline that you did last year, especially on the defensive side of the football. For Texas's defense, new defensive coordinator Will Muschamp is bringing a different scheme, different feel to Texas. So who helps Will Muschamp revitalize this Longhorn defense? Well, we're going to take a look at that with some of the breakout players that I expect to take shape with the Longhorn defense. First and foremost, Lance Jackson at edge. Played as a true freshman, enough to burn his red shirt, 2 TFLs, 17 pressures, 2 sacks. I'm expecting his sack count to double this year at the very least. Same with his tackles for loss count. 5-star to high school, 6'5", 272. Isn't quite Colin Simmons, but he has all the talent in the world. So returning him and Simmons, and with Muschamp and his aggressive scheme, you're looking at 2 DNs that can just get after the quarterback. There's a world where Texas is the best defensive end duo in America if Jackson's able to break out and Simmons continues to improve as a player entering his junior year, where he's definitely going to be, barring injury, a top 10 pick in the 2027 NFL draft. So pay attention to Lance Jackson. Justice Terry, lined up as a defensive end in the depth chart, could play at defensive tackle if he wanted to, could play really any position on the D-line. He's just that physically gifted. 4 pressures, 8 total tackles, PFF grade in the 70s last year. Texas loves to rotate and have deep defensive lines. I would expect him to have a huge year, get some more sacks, have double-digit pressures. This aggressive scheme is going to benefit the defensive line more than Pete Kwiatkowski did, especially the defensive ends. It's going to put the linebackers and secondary more into conflict, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes with some breakout players there. But Justice Terry is a hyper-talented player from the state of Georgia. Georgia wanted him. He chose Texas. And look, high school players from Georgia and Texas, almost always, when I see that and they're on a staff I trust, they get my stamp of approval, and they should get yours, because those are the 2 best states right now in terms of nurturing and developing high school talent. Ian Jeffrard, transferring in from Arkansas, just a massive human being, 6'5", over 380 pounds, 8 pressures last year, is going to fit Muschamp's ideal 3-4 scheme with a nose tackle to plug up the middle. Now, they'll go multiple. They'll use multiple different formations that are appropriate depending on the circumstance, the down and distance. But Jeffrard is a potential freak of nature, and Texas didn't have a true nose guard on its roster. Now they do via the portal with Ian Jeffrard, so that Muschamp's scheme in year one, a national title or bust year, can be maximized. So he's going to be an immediate impact transfer. Murad Watson was expected to be one last year, and he never really just put it all together at Texas. Was great at Syracuse, went to Texas, didn't hear his name that much. Maybe in year two, with a more aggressive system, with another year in Texas's elite strength and conditioning program, his pressures will get into the double digits. His TFLs will improve, and he'll, with the departure of Cole Brevard and some others in that room, he'll have more of an impact in this group. His snap count will go up, PFF grade will go up. Just have a better year in this system. Massive human being, 6'3", over 330 pounds. Texas's D tackles, we saw it last year and the year before. Deep, veteran, experienced. You have a lot of production, a lot of size and potential in that group. Can they put it together? That's the question. Tyler Atkinson at linebacker is a true freshman, and maybe he shouldn't be on this list, but Rasheem Biles is there. Brad Spence is there. Forgetting the other linebacker's name, but it's on the tip of my tongue and I know it. I just got to find it. You're looking at Ty Anthony Smith. So they have some proven guys there, but Biles is in a tier of his own, and Spence and Smith just aren't quite at his level, not really even close. Someone who I think could emerge as linebacker 2 at the end of the year, or certainly be in that conversation, is true freshman Tyler Atkinson. I think that he will play. I think that is part of the reason why he went to Texas. Out of Georgia, top 30 player in both 24/7 Sports and Rivals. Ohio State, Oregon, Georgia, Miami, these type of schools all wanted him. All have great staffs. All scout well, especially in high school. They wanted him, and Texas was able to get him. And he's a special type of player. And with a linebacker room that's, I think, thin, that provides an opportunity for a young player like Atkinson to step in. And if he pans out immediately in year one, you're looking at a player that is a long-term investment and can be there for 3 years or maybe even more. Xavier Filsame at safety, we already have Jelani McDonald, but Texas needs someone else to step up in that room. I expect that it will be him. A pass breakup, 16 total tackles, PFF grade in the 60s last year. They need, with the man coverage they're going to be running more often, with the aggression of Muschamp, defenders, backs turned to the quarterback, focusing on their man. They are going to need safeties that can hit hard, tackle to prevent the big plays. They're going to need players that can cover in man, that are athletic enough to do so. I believe Texas has that in the secondary, but safety is going to determine that more than corner, as I think they're more talented at corner and did a better job there in the portal and return more there from last year compared to this year. We'll see. Cade Phillips is a corner who I expect to take a step up. He sort of emerged last year, but that was as a true freshman, where Grayson Littleton also emerged. Littleton performed better. Littleton had more snaps, so I elected, because he was pretty much starting from day one, I elected to not put him on here. Phillips I did because he wasn't starting, from my understanding, from day one. Correct me if I'm wrong. And you're going to see him on the field every snap as long as he's healthy, or close to that. He's going to be starting in every game. 6 pass breakups, 22 total tackles, 5-star out of high school. Sign me up. Oh, and he's from Texas. So my rule earlier, you trust the staff, they've played well, and they're from the state of Texas, well, then they get the stamp of approval from college football with Sam. This defense was pretty good. It was a defense that I think was overhated a bit last year. Their biggest problem was, as the year went on and some injuries accumulated in the secondary, their secondary got exposed for being a bit thin. And we all remember the Mississippi State game. We remember the Georgia game, how Vanderbilt was able to come back. Teams were able to slice through this secondary late October, early November. And with the talent they had up front, they weren't able to really translate that into, you know, metaphorically speaking, killing opposing quarterbacks. They were really good at stopping the run, stopping the pass. They had some issues. There was like a, in my opinion, a better version of Georgia's defense last year. Really good against the run. Couldn't exactly get to the quarterback all the time, though they got to the quarterback way more than Georgia did. And they had issues in the secondary on top of that. Right now, I would expect this defense to metrically be similar to last year's, but they're going to improve in sack percentage. I believe they will, they should, in theory, do a better job against the run, just due to how much better that front could be. They probably will give up some more big plays, though, but we'll see, because the secondary is also deeper than it was last year. It's a fascinating change. I think Kwiatkowski was a great defensive coordinator. I just think that Texas also wanted something different. So we'll see how all of this pans out. But they had a great foundation last year. Muschamp is a great defensive mind. I'm curious to see how it all pans out. And I think that Cade Phillips, I think that Xavier Filsaime, you're looking at Lance Jackson, Ian Jeffrard. They return key players like Hero Kanu and Colin Simmons and bring in Rasheem Biles and Bo Mesco from the portal. You are looking at a defense that, look, with the offense Texas has, if that side of the ball pans out, and if the defense is top 10, you might be looking at the best team in college football and Texas's first national title contender. I mean, they had one in 24 and maybe 23, but your first team that's participating in the national title game since 2009 and your first national champion since 2005. Let me know what you think about this video, about this segment, and tell me who you think will break out for Texas football down below. Now we get into some fun stuff. Looking at coaching grades, looking at, how do I put this? Some other topics. Let me think really quickly, though, because we're almost at 3. At this point, we're going to go to 3:30, and I don't want to go for 3. I don't want to go for 3 hours. We discussed title odds, ACC Power Ratings. We did discuss all of that. Hold on, guys. I just want to take a look at certain things. Whoa. Yeah, I think we're gonna power through. We might try to make it quick, but we will try. We'll try to power through, but we're gonna make it quick. And then these videos, we don't even have much of, last night's or last afternoon stuff out yet. Kind of have with the preseason, we're not super anxious about getting stuff out immediately, but this stuff will be out starting probably in the next 48 hours, of course. Indiana is only going to get more talented, and this is something that I've said in previous segments, but I want to continue to hammer this point home because people are talking about Indiana across college football, and they are given more respect and more flowers than last year, for sure. But there is still this point about how, they lost so much last year. How are they ever going to replace it? And a player like Fernando Mendoza at round 1, pick 1, or D'Angelo Pons being one of the best corners in America, and Omar Cooper being a first-round receiver, it's hard to replace that talent as is. When you're Indiana and Curt Cignetti and you haven't quite had that talent on any of your great teams, whether at D2 or FCS or P4 level before, that is hard to replace. I do agree with that. But Indiana, from a team talent and recruiting standpoint, is more talented this year than last year. And that's only going to continue in the future. And I am a believer that recruiting matters. Even last year for Indiana. Think about it. Why did they struggle mightily at Penn State when they had injuries in the O-line? Everyone has injuries in the O-line. Well, it's because their starter to backup drop-off was bigger than at most schools. and recruiting played a part in that. Think about the national title game against Miami. If they, say, had a more blue chip tackle room, the odds of them getting beat up that badly are probably much lower than what actually happened on that field on that Monday night. And Indiana still won it all in spite of that. They were an exception to the rule with blue chip ratio and with recruiting. They were a huge exception to the rule. But even they couldn't totally ignore or bypass that. A lot of their players, like Tyreek Tucker, D'Angelo Pons, Jamari Sharp, you're looking at, name escapes me. Gosh, Omar Cooper was recruited by Tom Allen, but he was pretty much developed by Cignetti and his staff. Charlie Becker was recruited by Allen, I think stayed committed, and has only been developed by Cignetti and the staff. They have had a lot of players that they've had either starting at high school or only a year or two removed from high school that they've nurtured and developed. So that's an important part of their formula, and they're trying to recruit at a higher level in the 2027 recruiting class and beyond. They got Jalen Brewster, the number one player, according to 24/7 Sports, to visit them, and he had high praise. He's committed to Texas Tech right now as, I think, a athlete across the defensive line. It's incredible. 6'3", 302 pounds. Number one overall player per 24/7 Sports composite. Number two player in Texas, according to only 24/7 Sports. They're in contention with him. They're in contention with Monsoon Sales, an in-state 5-star wide receiver. They're in contention with other blue-chip players on offense, on defense, across the board. And they have not the deepest pockets in the world, but they have some deep pockets. The staff's already been able to sell the message with the 27-2 run under Curt Cignetti. This team's only going to get more talented. They're more talented by recruiting rankings this year than they are last year. And there's still people that I see treating this like a fluke. And it's not. It can't be. We've seen flukes before with Michigan State and TCU in 21 and 22, Washington even in 23, where they won a ridiculous amount of close games, and there was one player that you could point to there. Oh, for Michigan State, it was Kenneth Walker. For TCU, not as much. With Washington, not quite as much, because those teams were better than that Michigan State team. But you could point to, for Washington, Roma Dunze or Michael Penix. Not really many players on defense. For TCU in the national title, or the national tournament, the college football playoff semifinal, you could point to Bud Clark in the pick six. A lot of the times it was Max Duggan carrying the team on his back, Keandre Miller or Quentin Johnson. Indiana was even more diverse in terms of attack than those teams, and that was even with them having round one, pick one, a better quarterback in college than what any of those teams had. 1 minute it was Elijah Surratt, the other Omar Cooper Jr. The next, it was Charlie Becker. Sometimes it was Noah Kowski. Those running backs were really underrated. Pat Coogan was a fantastic center that made great plays for them. And you had D'Angelo Pons on defense, Aiden Fisher at linebacker. Elijah Hardy sort of came out of nowhere in some people's minds and led the team in sacks last year. Stephen Daly was a key contributor in some games. Same with Tyreek Tucker and Mario Landino. This team was so good relative to their talent level last year that it isn't flukish. It can't be explained by luck. Some parts of it maybe, but it's probably a very minimal part of their formula was luck. They didn't win a cancerous amount of close games. They won, 4 of them out of 16? Michigan did that in 2023. Ohio State was like 2 made field goals away from doing that in 2024. Georgia had that in 2022. Some of Nick Saban's Alabama teams had that. I don't think Indiana would be, favored over those Nick Saban Alabama teams or beat many of them, in part because of the recruiting factor. But they just earned the #1 portal class this year per On3. They hit in the portal again. You look at their roster this year, and how people view their roster this year, even experts, view it as better than it was last year at this time. Now, I'm not telling you they're a lock to go 16-0 and make the playoffs and win it all. That'd be ridiculous. It's so hard to get to the playoffs and then to repeat as a national champion and repeat as 16-0. This is not me telling you, oh, Indiana's going to win the national championship. This is me telling you that yet again, they've hit on their portal evals. They're recruiting at a higher level. Their players this year on defense are taller, longer, faster, stronger than they were last year. And that was with a defense that was unanimously top 3 across the board. The offense was unanimously top 3. Now, they lose 6 picks, 2 of them in the first round off that offense. So I think they'll have a much harder time reloading there. Mendoza being round 1, pick 1, I just don't see how Hoover, with the type of QB he is in his frame, can really be better than that. But the O-line should be better. Receiver with Nick Marsh and Charlie Becker could be better. You could have 2 first-round picks instead of 1. I don't really see how tight end's going to be better, but they figured out that position before. Nowakowski wasn't exactly well known until he came to Indiana. There's something about this staff that's almost intangible. It's hard to measure, but it's there, and we have to figure out what it is, because for 2 years in a row, this team has sustainably outperformed their talent level. And what do I mean by sustainable? I mean that a good way to predict a team to regress is looking at close wins. Indiana in 2024 was 1-0 in close games. That's not considered unsustainable. That's actually kind of normal. Blow out the teams that you're better than, get blown out by the teams better than you. That's very normal. When you return a lot from a team like that, your team should be the same or better. And that was the trend I saw entering 2025. It's why I said Indiana would be better from a power rating standpoint. I was just skeptical of whether or not they were guaranteed to reach the playoff, because at the time their schedule looked much tougher. And it was much tougher, but the team was just so much better that it didn't matter, and they went 12-0 anyway. And then they went 16-0. And they won 4 close games. That's a bit more unsustainable. I'd say Indiana record-wise will take a step back from where they were last year, maybe even a sizable one. But that also is normal when you go 16-0. It's hard to go back-to-back as national champions, let alone back-to-back undefeated. That'd be 32-0. In the 14 playoff era, it'd be 30-0, and no one went 30-0. Even Georgia, in their back-to-back run, went 29-1. Alabama in 2011 and 2012, they went, if my memory serves me correctly, it was 25-2 in their back-to-back run. It's hard. So Indiana regressing wouldn't be, oh yeah, that's a fluke, because if they simply reach the playoffs again with their talent composite, that's a massive overachievement relative to what we're used to in the college football world of recruiting. And you're seeing this roster improve talent-wise with Nick Marsh, who was a 4-star out of high school, was a 4-star in the portal. Indiana wouldn't have gotten that caliber of athlete in the 2024 or 2025 transfer portal. That doesn't mean it'll be better than Omar Cooper Jr., though, because as Indiana has shown us and other staffs have shown us, star rating does not always equal superior athlete or elite athlete. There is a correlation and causation effect there. The ratio of blue chip players that go to the NFL versus not prove that for sure. But there's also a lot that goes into recruiting rankings that you or I don't always think about. Like how when a player is offered by Alabama or Ohio State or commits there, their ranking shoots up because those staffs are trusted and because good players go there and they do a good job developing. So there's some of that baked in there. Indiana's now going to get that treatment, I think, where there is going to be more benefit of the doubt to that staff. Good players are going to pay more attention to them. Like, even if Jalen Brewster doesn't go, he's going to visit there and give them high praise. Nick Marsh, Indiana beat Notre Dame out for him. Tobi Osusanmi is a great player from Kansas State. 4-star out of high school, 3 or 4-star in the portal, depending on where you look. 4 sacks, 14 pressures. He's going to be a great player for them this year, and he'll be a part of why their roster talent has improved. Indiana hasn't seen DNs under Cignetti that are 6'3", 250 pounds. They usually have been shorter than that. Size isn't the end-all be-all, as D'Angelo Ponza showed, but if D'Angelo Pons were, say, 6'1 or 6'2 and had everything he had as being 5'9", you would pick 6'2" D'Angelo Pons over 5'9" if they were the exact same in everything else. Like, measurables to a certain degree do matter. And IU is now getting these players that have superior measurables. And as long as they buy in at the same level as these other players did, and I mean, why wouldn't they? Otherwise, they wouldn't be going to Indiana. They're going to actually get better than this. And that's pretty scary to think about. And people have got to accept that. I continue to see people, the casual fans are like a complete 180 on Indiana. They're worshiping Indiana, or they, think that they're going to go back to going 6-6. And that's complete idiocy. I'm seeing a lot of smart people, I think, overthink this. Now, I buy Indiana at least regressing a little bit from last year to this year record-wise, for sure. The schedule's tougher. The quarterback isn't the same. The quarterback was a big reason why the close games were won. Same with the receivers. And that's been, there's a lack of production there compared to what we saw last year. So it is likely that this team, even if they win it all, might do it with a 15-1 record or a 14-2 record. But Indiana's here to stay. And I will tell you right here and right now, I don't know if it's going to be this year. It very well could be. Cignetti at Indiana will field a team that is power rated better, that would be favored to beat the 2025 national champions neutral field. They're only going to get more talented. And another player who I think embodies that is A.J. Harris, who's a 5-star out of high school, 4-star or 3-star in the portal, depending on where you looked, had a fantastic 2024 season, kind of went down with the ship at Penn State as everyone did last year. I'm expecting him to have a pretty damn good year this season. And he is a corner with his 2024 play and his measurables. He can be picked in the first round. Make no mistake about that. Indiana lost 3 defensive ends from last year's team. They all went undrafted, in large part due to measurables. They now have bigger, faster, stronger players at many of these spots on defense and some even on offense. And they're only going to continue to get bigger, faster, stronger, until they reach that point of where they've maxed out. They have as much talent as they're going to get. And they're very far away from that. What they did last year, and people say I'm too high on them, or I'm, the term glazing comes to mind. No, I'm not doing that. You want to know why I'm not doing that? Because who goes 16-0 with the 72nd recruiting roster? Doesn't mean they're going to win it all every year. They won't. And if they do, I'll eat my words, but I'll very confidently say they won't, because not even Saban did that. Bill Schnieder at Kansas State, who was back then what Cignetti is today, he didn't even reach the Big 12 title game every year. Cignetti at prior stops didn't win the national title or play in the national title game every year. So that's not going to happen here. But there is something special here. This is a team and a program that now is going to be in the playoffs pretty much every year, if not every year. They are going to be a national title contender almost every year, if not every year. And they will win more titles under Curt Cignetti if he stays here for like another 5 years, or especially another 10 years. Indiana's only going to get more talented, and you've heard it from me, and you've probably heard it from others like Buffton Prime TCal, for example. Do not overthink this. This whole thing about how, there's no way they could be a national title contender again, or that this isn't sustainable. There is maybe a kernel of truth there with the sustainability portion, because it's damn hard to go 16-0, let alone with that roster composite. But they've done it for 2 years. One year you can excuse as a fluke, even though I think it was statistically dishonest with the fact they didn't win a lot of close games. Like, they just beat up on these teams. What about 2 years? Doing the exact same thing and winning it all. And finally beating top-end programs. How's that a fluke? They beat Oregon twice by double digits. They crushed Alabama, and they would have beaten them 99 out of 100 times, and the one time Alabama won, Alabama would have won in a close game with a 5-0 turnover margin. This is not a fluke. It is not in any way. That doesn't mean you go to the opposite end of the spectrum and say they'll go 16-0 every year. They will not. But we gotta talk about this team and program as it is, which it's insane, it's unreal, it's crazy. They do things differently. And no, they do not have the most talented roster in the country. But they have something special with that roster, with that staff. That's the number one staff in the country. And what they do with that roster and how they scout, nurture, and develop means that they have a roster that is way far above and beyond what recruiting rankings can comprehend and guesstimate with those players. And where recruiting rankings would tell you Indiana's roster is, IU's roster is well ahead of that as a baseline. You can even see it in their measurables and production. Yeah, they're not blue chippers, but they may as well be. They're not the number one roster. They don't have the most NFL talent, but they're closer to number one than they are number 50. And you see that reflected on the field. With Michigan State, I haven't talked about the Spartans in a while, so I want to discuss where they are, I think, in college football, who they are. What's Michigan State's place in the sport? I think you have to ask that before talking about their win total, their roster, their coaching staff. Should the Spartans have high expectations? Are they a great program? How bought in should the fan base be? What is Michigan State's long-term goal? Like, these are the questions that should be asked before talking about 2026. And that is because, look, their win total's at 3.5. Fitzgerald is known as a builder, so you're not expecting them to come out and light the world on fire in year one. And if they do, then kudos to Fitzgerald, and you're going to sit back, relax, and enjoy the show if you're a Spartan. We have to look at what Michigan State's place is in college football because of what's transpired with them over the past 5 years, 10 years even. It has been 10 years since Michigan State has put together back-to-back successful seasons. Guys, if you really want to think about it that way, it's been that long. 2021 was a blip on the radar, even with Tucker having, pretty good classes back-to-back. They didn't pan out into really anything. Oh, Keon Coleman was a good receiver. Well, he transfers to Florida State. Jaden Reed can't help the team defend the forward pass or run the ball when they don't have Kenneth Walker. Some of the good offensive linemen they recruited were absolute busts. Same with the quarterback position. Same with players on defense. I mean, Jordan Hall is going to be one of the better linebackers in the Big Ten this year. He was a Tucker recruit. All they did was probably recruit him. That's the only positive you can say about that staff getting that caliber of players. Oh, they recruited him. They did nothing to develop him. And before 2021, we had 2020, which was a disaster. They beat Michigan, but Michigan wasn't that good. 19 was bad. 18 was bad. 17 was a lot like 2021, where they won a bunch of close games. And in the big games, Ohio State on the road, they got aced. And 16 was 3-9. 14 and 15, that was the last 2-year stretch of great Spartan football here. 2022, 23, 24, 25, awful teams. 22 and 25 went 5-7. 23 and 25 went 4-8. So you've been alternating 5 and 4 win seasons. It's pretty painful. It's pretty gross. It's well below what the Spartan standard should be. Michigan State's place in college football is not like that of a blue blood. They shouldn't expect to, say, compete for national titles at the same rate that many other programs do. But Michigan State's place in college football is not being Michigan's punching bag, or Ohio State's punching bag, or Notre Dame's, or Wisconsin's, or let alone now Indiana's. That's not. Michigan State should not sit back and be happy to go to a bowl game. That's insanity. They're a top 20 program all time. They're top 25 in revenue. They have one of the largest alumni bases in all of college football. They're a prestigious university that has had success before. They've won titles before. They've competed for the playoff and for titles before. D'Antonio in the 2010s, early 2010s, was the best coach in the Big Ten. So they're able to attract great football minds and field great teams. Is it as easy as Michigan? No. Do they have the same ceiling as Michigan? No. Is their floor as low as Michigan's? No. Same with the other blue blood programs in the Big Ten. But that doesn't mean they can't expect to compete with them or beat them in certain given seasons, which D'Antonio showed was possible. I don't know if that's going to happen with Fitzgerald, but I know that with Fitzgerald, Michigan State should expect him to, after year one, which will be a rebuilding year most likely, that's what the win total is saying, they should expect him to, okay, so you got through when you were 4-8 and you didn't quit, unlike Jonathan Smith's teams. So that's improvement. Now win 6 or 7 games. Do that for 2 years and start winning 8 games, then 9 games, and get to a point where maybe every 4 or 5 years you can, be in the playoffs or fielding a team that can win the Big Ten. And maybe that's not even high enough expectations, but it's much like with Nebraska, where I have a hard time until they do it, until they hit a standard. I have a hard time going beyond cycling up to be good for a few years. It's possible at Michigan State. It's possible for this team to be a national championship caliber program, but you got to get the right guy. That's the case with any school. Ohio State is potentially the one exception there, but even with John Cooper, even with Earl Bruce, they had some pretty rough seasons. I mean, Luke Fickell wasn't the right guy when he was the interim head coach, and they recruited well and developed well, and I know they had good players that opted out that season because they were suspended, but they went 6-7. Like, the man leading the organization and his workers and his collaborators and those backing him are more important than the brand, than the logo. Far more important than it. And the logo is simply a vehicle to get that man. That's why Ohio State is such a good program. The brand at times acts as a self-fulfilling prophecy, and then those at Ohio State have parlayed that reputation into making all the correct moves with coaching for the 21st century and before that. Michigan State hasn't done that. Michigan, their brother in the state, not little brother, not big brother, not any of that crap here. They are in-state schools, they're rivals, they are from the same tree. Michigan is a classic example of this. Michigan has made very awful coaching moves in the 21st century. Kind of forcing Carr into retirement, only to hiring Rich Rod, never backing him, and it fails and sucks. Hiring Brady Hoke because Michigan man, and the runner-up was Les Miles, who wouldn't have been that good. Dead. They get Harbaugh, and there's a disconnect there, and he has success, but then is embroiled in controversy. They bungle, handling that, and he leaves, and then they hire Moore. That sucks, and now they're on Kyle Whittingham, their 6th coach in the 21st century. Michigan has a higher ceiling and floor than Michigan State, yes, but they haven't exactly been a top 5 program in the 21st century. Very barely could they maybe make the argument to be top 10 because they have the Natty, but they did not win at the level they should have given the talent because the people involved were not good enough. So college football being the very meritocratic sport it is, not perfect there, but I think it's pretty meritocratic and more so than other sports due to how many people you have to manage, how many players you have. They just haven't had a ton of success. And Michigan State for a while was the better program in the late 2000s and early 2010s in that stretch with D'Antonio, because Michigan State made better decisions and Michigan made inferior decisions. So just bringing up Pat Fitzgerald here, didn't have a good finish at Northwestern, but had a, positive win-loss percentage there, or a, above 500 percentage. And that's good for Northwestern. That's about what David Braun has right now. And I also think Braun is a pretty good coach. Can he adapt to the portal and NIL era? We'll have to see. And the schedule doesn't exactly look super duper promising. At Notre Dame, at Michigan, Washington, Oregon, at Wisconsin's going to be tough. I mean, every game on this schedule, except for maybe Toledo and Eastern Michigan, is going to be a challenge for this team. And the win total is at 3.5 right now. Pretty low. Michigan State's expected to go 3-9 or 4-8 this year. That's not the long-term expectation. I think that could be acceptable in year one, sure, with what's going on. But that's not what Michigan State's normal is. That's not what it should be, even if maybe their norm says, they, historically, it's 7-5 or 8-4 for them. I mean, I hear that about Michigan all the time when people say Michigan should have higher expectations and do well, and people are like, they averaged 4 losses the past 20 years. All that says is they've disappointed. That doesn't mean that's who they are or that's their ceiling. Those are two different things. It's true, but it's being used in a intellectually dishonest way to make life for bigger programs easier. Like, Michigan fan will say that Michigan State should be happy with 6 wins because then Michigan isn't threatened in recruiting, or they're not threatened reputationally by losing to their rival. It's the same thing with Ohio State and Michigan, where I think that Michigan State's relationship with Michigan is a lot like Michigan's with Ohio State, where you're kind of living in that program's shadow historically and perceptionally, and that is a disadvantage from like a national recruiting angle, but it very well can be an advantage on game day just due to the nature of like airheadedness and arrogance or the underdog mentality. Michigan State is going to be an underdog as a program to a lot of top-end programs, but that doesn't mean they can't be searching for championships. That's not what that means at all. Now looking at some coaching report cards, I'm going to be so happy once we're done here. So happy with that. But yeah, we got to get through it. So we'll be discussing Dan Lanning and his report card entering year 5. How well has Dan Lanning performed as the head coach of the Oregon Ducks? I haven't done this previously in my head coach report card series, but today I'm going to tell you right out of the gate, Lanning gets an A+ from me as the head coach of Oregon. He took what Cristobal built there, which was a national recruiting program, a Pac-12 title contender, not quite a national title or college football playoff contender though, and he made it better. That was a mutually beneficial move for Oregon to let Cristobal go to Miami, and for Oregon to hire Dan Lanning from Georgia. That was one of the most mutually beneficial moves we've ever seen in college football. Lanning is 48-8 with the Ducks. He is off of back-to-back 13-win seasons, 13-2 last year, 13-1 in 2024. In that time frame, he has won the Big Ten. He is 500 in college football playoff games, going 2-2. And in each season, he had a 500 or better record against the top 10, both in, at the time, FPI, and look, Penn State, pre-James Franklin getting fired and losing the locker room. They had a top 10 team. It wasn't top 5, but it was top 10. To trade blows in top 10 games, to win the Big Ten, to reach the quarterfinals and semifinals in back-to-back seasons, there's only 2 other programs that can claim that caliber of success within 2 years. And if you extend it back to 3 seasons, there's only like what, 1 program that, or no, actually 2 that can claim to have that kind of success. If you go 3 years, it's Georgia and Ohio State are the only other programs that really measure up to Lanning success at Oregon. If it's 2, it's Indiana and Ohio State. That metric right there is why I have Ohio State as the number 1 program in college football using a 2-year window, because they were also good in year 3. Indiana I have as the number 2 program in college football using my 2-year window, and the tiebreaker was just Ohio State's had more sustained historical success under Day. Need to see more of, Cignetti with a larger sample size. And Ohio State's power rated the highest over the past 2 years. And then Oregon was my program 3 because they're the closest program over the past 2 years to having that national success. And that is a credit to Dan Lanning. They have signed the top classes over the past 2 years in terms of quality. Number 1 in average rank per recruit. He's produced a first-round QB. He's won big games. He beat Franklin twice on the road, really in both situations. Like that Big Ten championship game in 2024 was a lot like the Indiana-Ohio State one, where Indiana had almost a de facto home crowd feel. Wasn't totally home, but mostly it was Indiana in that game. And then Penn State had mostly Penn State fans against Oregon. And Oregon beat them in that environment that was a quasi-road game. They beat them in the real road game last year. The Texas Tech win was huge. They beat Ryan Day and Ohio State in the regular season in 2024. There, I just named 4 big wins. And if you want to count one of Washington or Iowa or USC last year, especially Iowa and Washington since they were on the road, I can let you do that. I mean, Iowa almost beat Indiana last year. I would have loved to see how, Ohio State traveled against Iowa on the road. Think they would have won that game as Oregon and Indiana did, but what about Georgia? Does Georgia win on the road in Kinnick? Does Texas win on the road in Kinnick? Does Alabama win on the road in Kinnick? What about Miami or Texas Tech themselves? Lanning's won big games. He's won championships, just not the national championship yet. And he has a really good record and a good track record for recruiting and developing and nurturing talent. Look at this trend for Oregon. They're only trending up. That's all they're doing. They're not trending down. Their recruiting is rising. Their win-loss record, they continue to stack wins and wins and wins. They had their best efficiency score ever in FPI under Lanning. Now, you can't measure that year to year. 2023 was a stronger year than 2025. And that's why the efficiency score was lower, because there were just more teams at the top, and efficiency is relative to the average college football team. And the average college football team now is weaker than it was in 23 and 22, for example. But I think 2025 was certainly a better Oregon team than 2024. It was Lanning's best or second best, depending on how you view the 2023 team. And entering 2026, Lanning clearly has his most talented roster ever at Oregon. The assistant staff is still good. I think Oregon's upgraded at DC, probably downgraded at the offensive coordinator spot, but we'll see how Drew Maringer performs. And Dante Moore is his most talented quarterback. He has his most talented D-line ever, his most talented defense, receiver core, running back room. The O-line could even improve from where it was last year. Jamari Johnson's a projected first-round tight end. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but this is a fantastic coaching job. I gave Marcus Freeman an A at Notre Dame. Only reason it wasn't an A+ is because they somehow missed the playoffs last year. And with hindsight, with their power rating, I don't know if they had any business doing that. Oregon, Lanning inherited a good situation, much like Freeman did. Both turn it around. They're very similar. I think Oregon's done a better job at recruiting and a better job developing for the NFL level at an overall balanced angle. And they've made the playoff for 2 years in a row. They weren't, a one-in 2024, and then they missed in 2025, where they, didn't win a big game that year. So that's why I would have, say, Lanning with an A+. I like Lanning more than Sark, Freeman, or the other coaches that are kind of waiting for their turn after Day, Kirby, and Cignetti have won theirs. And it was a long time ago, but same with Dabo Swinney. I think Lanning is going to be that next coach to win a national championship, that next new coach, whether it's this year or 27 or in the future, he will be the first. He will. His university right now looks more like 21 to 23 Georgia than Kirby Smart's Georgia Bulldogs do. And I think Smart's done a pretty good job at Georgia, and this Georgia team is going to be pretty good. Oregon right now, when you look at their starting and two-deep roster, no one in the Big Ten is like it. Not even Ohio State from a starting angle. Like, Ohio State has the same potential because Ohio State and Oregon recruit at the same level, but Oregon's older. Oregon has more production. Oregon, from a quality angle, has actually out-recruited them in the past 2 cycles, which is nuts. Even with the NIL backing that they have, which is almost unparalleled across college football. This program is in a very healthy spot. And when I look at this schedule, how can't I like Oregon to reach Indy at minimum in the playoffs and go on some type of run? And at most, this team can go 16-0. They can beat anyone on this schedule. They'll be favored by double digits over everyone on the schedule, except for Ohio State on the road and maybe USC on the road. But that's going to be pretty much it. And they're better than everyone roster-wise here by quite a bit, except for Ohio State. And I still think they're better than Ohio State. They're better lines of scrimmage, better NFL QB at least, more proven in the defensive backfield, deeper at receiver, have had a better college history recently on the offensive line in terms of the run game, and they return a star sophomore running back in De'Aaron Hill Jr. and Jordan Davison, like Ohio State does with Bo Jackson. So when you're fighting with Ohio State, Georgia, and Indiana, like the last 3 coaches that have won it all and who I think have the 3 best staffs in football, when you're the closest to them out of anyone outside of that group of 3, you've done an A-plus coaching job. And that's what Dan Lanning has done. Dan Lanning is a top 5 coach with a top 5 staff with the best roster in college football entering this season. Can't wait to see what they do. And that's why I would give the Oregon coach an A+ entering his 5th year. It's not going to be the same thing for Deion Sanders. I hate to tell you guys that. Actually, I don't hate to tell you guys that. I love to tell you guys that because I had to, get some air out of my nose for a minute. Man, oh man. With Deion Sanders, I liked the idea. I loved the idea of Deion Sanders working at Colorado, but it has not. And I've gotten flack before for saying things that I think are totally true. For example, Schnieder Sanders takes sacks to puff up his completion percentage. People called me all types of names and said I was like evil and other political slang that we won't discuss here. And then I, in a conversation with someone, get sent this clip from the NFL where it's 4th and 20, he scrambles and slides in bounds. I'm like, oh, so he's doing it in the NFL too. And no one's talking about this nationally. So I'm going to talk about it here. That the culture here, the experience at Colorado, the whole project that was Deion Sanders coming in, being a head coach, kind of creating his own mini dynasty in the Big 12, getting more talent than everyone, developing great young men, it's a lie. It is a complete and utter mirage. It's a disaster. Every bad thing that has been said about that program, from players, from coaches, from media, it is literally almost all correct, which is very, very sad because I loved the idea. I wanted it to work. I wanted them to be a program that could, win 9 or 10 games a year and compete for the 12-team playoff in the Big 12. There was a time where I thought they would kind of be to the Big 12 what it seems like Texas Tech is going to be now moving forward. Deion Sanders, he gets an F here for his coaching report card. How well's the Colorado coach performed? Well, when you have SEC and Big Ten players, when you have Travis Hunter, Schnieder Sanders, you have some of the receivers they do like Amarion Miller, you get, Colton Hood, some of these other great players that transfer out of the program, Nakai Hill-Green, that have had success elsewhere. You have those type of players. And in your best year at Colorado, you let Lance Leipold in Kansas with no defense and no passing attack just hand off, win. There was more complaining about Kansas's defensive back making a football play on a tackle in that game than there was about the fact that they had that much talent on defense and let Kansas run for 300 yards on them. The fact that that team went 9-4 and their biggest games, BYU and Nebraska, they got hosed. You, Deion Sanders in Colorado, you got hosed by year one Dylan Raiola. You got hosed by Marcus Satterfield and hosed by Tony White, who's now at Florida State and stuck there. You got hosed by whatever his name is, Jake Ratzliff for BYU, who then got suspended because he did something stupid. He broke a rule that he knew was a rule at BYU, and he ran like the option at Tulane, like glorified good G5 QB, average to below average BYU QB. You got hosed by those teams and schools and players, and you have the church bells to complain about other things or off the field things or try to make this about morality. This is football that we're talking about. I remember when Uncle Lou got hate for exposing this. And you know what? It turned out that he was correct about this all along, more than anyone else was. T-Cal has talked about it. Buffed Prime has talked about, stuff publicly on Twitter, some on YouTube. I'm talking about it here and now. This has sucked. This is a terrible, terrible coaching job that we are witnessing here with Deion Sanders in Colorado. Players get there, they want to play for him, they get the ugly truth, they leave, even if they're good. They can't hang on to coaches, there. They sucked last year. Like Arizona, couldn't stop them. Utah's backup QB, couldn't stop them. Beat Iowa State because, Iowa State didn't even finish top 25 in FPI. And it was just one okay win. Whatever. It's just a blip on the radar of failure that's surrounding that one exception to the rule. And we've seen what's happened in the NFL. Like, look, Travis Hunter, doing great, but they're going to move him to play corner. Like, you can't just play wide receiver and corner in the NFL. It just doesn't happen. We've seen Schnieder Sanders. 9. The legend of J.J. McCarthy, who has sucked butt, who is horrible in the NFL, had a superior QBR to Schnieder Sanders. And his number was retired at Colorado. Like, what are we doing here? Why aren't people talking about this? Like, this has been an utter abject failure. The only successful part of this has been that Colorado has gotten attention. That's it. And they may have sold their soul, and it might end up being a negative period because of how bad the team was last year and how bad it honestly projects to be this year. I mean, Sanders at Colorado is 43-27. On 61.4% of his games now. Is that the that's his career win percentage. My apologies. That's actually incorrect because at Colorado, he 4-8 the first year, 9-4 the second. So you're looking at 13-12, and now you're looking at 16-21 at Colorado. His career win percentage, that is what I cited as 43-27. At Colorado, he's 16-21, 9-18 in conference play with 2 seasons of 1-8 records. Just look at this trend here. How can anyone deny that it has been an absolute failure? They had one good year where they were more talented than anyone they played, to be frank. They were more talented than Nebraska. They were more talented than BYU, than Kansas, than anyone they played all season long. They never, ever, ever played a team that year that was more talented than them from an NFL angle. And they lost 4 games. And 2 of them were non-competitive blowouts. The Kansas one even, like that was pretty bad, and Kansas was in full control for that entire game. And then that season is bookmarked by 2 seasons with a negative FPI score, with awful recruiting rankings. Sanders has not adapted to high school. Like Curt Cignetti, people talk about him and Kiffin as the Portal Kings. They scout well out of high school and they develop high school talent. Sanders, no. Like Jordan Seaton didn't get developed. He got worse or stayed the same. His talents were what he learned at high school. That's why he left for LSU. That's why other players have left for greener and brighter pastures and superior schools and coaching staffs. And then look at the metrics here. Let's look at this. They were outside the top 110 in points per play margin and success rate with a Big 12 schedule. You know how bad you have to be in that position? You know how bad you have to be to get Caden Salter in the Big 12 and do nothing with him? You know how bad you have to be to get so much 4-star talent relative to everyone else in the conference and high ceiling players and never develop them? What are we doing? What are we doing here? Deion Sanders, for me, just gets an F. It's been an absolute failure. And part of me hopes I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm going to be. Their win total's 4.5 with a fairly workable schedule. And what indicates that they can beat Georgia Tech on the road, or even Northwestern on the road, or certainly Texas Tech, Utah, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, Houston? I mean, what indicates that this has been anything but a failure? I don't think anything has. So this is harsh. It's meant to be harsh because everyone, was excited about this, and excitement was okay. But then people would gas it up, and the whole Colorado thing got so astroturfed. And if you went against it, you were called bad names, and people tried to genuinely ruin you. Where are those people now? They're probably not even watching football because they were always casuals and just interested in the idea and not actually helping the sport. It's been an abject failure. That's all I have to say, guys. We've been streaming for long enough. I'm now going to probably take an hour 30 break and just decompress, get some more videos from yesterday out, eat because I'm starving. I love you guys so much. You guys are incredible. We've seen growth with our live shows, growth with our videos, growth across the channel. I cannot wait for college football. I want to see Ohio State go down to Texas, and I want to see if, I right now think Ohio State's going to win that game. I want to see if, Ryan Day and Matt Patricia and Arthur Smith can put pedal to the metal, or I want to see if Sark and Muschamp can avenge the past 2 seasons of disappointment at the hands of Ohio State. I want to see Michigan, Oklahoma in the big house and see if Michigan can rout Oklahoma, or if Oklahoma is going to come in there and win 2 games in a row. I want to see Indiana, Ohio State in a battle for conference supremacy. I want to see Georgia and whether or not that pass rush or secondary takes a step forward. This is the best sport on planet Earth. It is our goal to be the best person, the best organization, the best group of fans covering it. We'll see y'all very soon. Love y'all. We'll see you tomorrow at noon Eastern time. And then again, next week, Monday or Tuesday. And then for the rest of the weekdays at noon. Love you guys.